Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when closing your eyes wasn't a simple luxury, but a calculated gamble with death itself. You're standing at the mouth of a shallow cave somewhere in East Africa, roughly 300,000 years ago, and the sun is bleeding red across the savanna horizon. Your hands are trembling slightly as you arrange dried grass into a sleeping mat, because you know what's coming. In about an hour, when the last light drains from the sky, the lions will begin their nightly patrol. You can already hear their distant grunts echoing across the acacia grasslands, a sound that makes your stomach clench with primal recognition. This isn't a nature documentary you're watching from your couch. You are the prey, and tonight, like every night, you'll need to outsmart creatures that evolution designed specifically to kill mammals exactly your size. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why you still jolt awake at 3 a.m. for no reason, or why children are terrified of the dark despite growing up in perfectly safe bedrooms. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from, whether it's a cozy bedroom in Seattle or a late-night scroll session in Tokyo. Maybe share what helps you sleep or what keeps you awake. Your words create a little community here, a digital campfire where we're all safe together. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional. And let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're crouching now, blowing gently on a small pile of smouldering bark that you've carried for 3 days in a hollowed gourd. Your cheeks puff out, your eyes water from the smoke, and then, glory, a tiny flame licks upward. Relief floods through your chest because this flame is the only reason you'll probably see tomorrow. Fire is humanity's first and most essential security system, the invention that transformed us from lion snacks into lion avoiders. You feed it carefully, adding dry twigs first, then progressively larger branches, building the blaze until it casts a dome of orange light about 15 feet in diameter. Beyond that light, the world becomes a wall of absolute darkness, punctuated by reflecting eyes, yellow, unblinking, calculating. Your band members are gathering now, 18 humans total, ranging from infants to a grizzled elder who might be 40 years old, which makes him practically ancient. Everyone knows their role without speaking. The elder tends the fire's heart, maintaining the perfect balance between too small, inviting attack, and too large, wasting precious fuel. 3 young adults, including you, have spent the afternoon gathering enough dead wood to last until dawn, a task that consumed 4 hours and left your arms scratched from thorns. It's boring, exhausting work, the kind that makes you understand why humans eventually invented Netflix. But if you slack off, if you decide that today you'll only gather half as much, tonight someone might die screaming in the jaws of a predator that weighs 400 pounds and can crack an antelope's spine with one bite. The fire's magic isn't really magical at all, though it must have seemed like sorcery to the first human who tamed it. Lions, leopards, and hyenas possess an instinctive fear of flames that's been encoded into their DNA through countless generations. A wildfire means death, burned paws, singed whiskers, and suffocating smoke. So when they see fire, their brains scream danger, overriding even their hunger. You're essentially weaponizing their own evolutionary programming against them. It's psychological warfare, and you're winning, mostly. Historians still argue whether early humans discovered fire through lightning strikes, volcanic activity, or by observing spontaneous combustion in dry grasslands. But everyone agrees that learning to maintain and transport it represented humanity's first major technological breakthrough. Before fire, you were just another medium-sized mammal with delusions of grandeur. After fire, you became something unprecedented, a species that could reshape its environment to suit its vulnerabilities. But fire isn't foolproof, and you know this from whispered stories shared during daylight hours. Last year, during the long rains, a band 3 valleys over let their fire die when a torrential downpour swamped their inadequate shelter. By morning, hyenas had dragged away 2 children. You didn't see the aftermath yourself, but you heard the wails of grief that carried across the landscape, a sound that made your own mother clutch you tighter even though you were already 15 and nearly full grown. That sound is why you're now double-checking your woodpile, ensuring every piece is dry and strategically placed for quick feeding into the flames. You settle onto your grass mat, positioned deliberately between the fire and the cave wall. The stone at your back is still sun-warm, a small comfort that will fade as the night deepens. Your sleeping spot isn't random. It's been chosen based on careful observation of air currents, proximity to heat, and escape routes should something go catastrophically wrong. The cave itself is barely 20 feet deep, more of an overhang than a true cavern, but it's positioned on elevated ground that predators must approach uphill. That matters. When a lion charges, it wants gravity on its side, wants to use its momentum to bowl over prey. Making them work uphill reduces their advantage, gives you an extra second to react. An extra second is sometimes the difference between death and survival. Around you, the band is settling in with practiced efficiency. Mothers arrange children in the safest positions, farthest from the entrance. The hunters, 3 lean men with scars crisscrossing their arms, position themselves in the outer ring, weapons within easy reach. You're in the middle tier, old enough to fight if necessary but not yet trusted with primary defense. It's a hierarchy based purely on survival value, nothing personal, nothing democratic. In a world where mourning isn't guaranteed, sentimentality is a luxury your species can't afford. The fire crackles and pops, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness like tiny orange spirits. You watch them fade and die, and something in your proto-human consciousness finds the display beautiful, though you don't have words for aesthetic appreciation yet. Your language is still rudimentary, mostly concrete nouns and simple verbs, but beauty exists in your neurons even without vocabulary to describe it. Maybe that's why humans still find campfires hypnotic 300,000 years later. It's genetic memory, ancestral recognition that fire equals safety, equals survival. Beyond the light's edge, you hear movement. A soft padding sound, rhythmic and purposeful. Your body tenses automatically, adrenaline dumping into your bloodstream, sharpening your senses. The elder adds another branch to the fire, making it flare brighter, and the padding stops. After a long moment, it retreats. Whatever was out there, probably a leopard based on the sound pattern, decided the risk wasn't worth it. You exhale slowly, willing your heart to calm down, knowing you'll probably repeat this exact scenario a dozen times before sunrise. It's going to be a long night, as every night is long when you're delicious. Word count: 1,289. I need to add more content to reach the 1,500 word target. You pull your antelope hide closer around your shoulders, feeling its familiar weight. The hide belonged to an animal your uncle killed 2 weeks ago, and you helped with the butchering, the scraping, the curing process that transformed raw skin into something useful. Nothing is wasted in your world. Waste is death by another name. The hide still carries a faint musky smell that you find comforting, a scent that means food in your belly and protection from cold nights. Someone from the modern era might find it disgusting, but you'd find their world equally strange. All those resources squandered, all that safety taken for granted, all those people sleeping alone in separate rooms like they've forgotten that isolation kills. Your eyelids are growing heavy now, the day's exhaustion finally overwhelming your vigilance. You've walked 12 miles today, foraging for roots and insects, carrying water in ostrich eggs, throwing stones to keep vultures away from a scavenging site. Your feet ache, your shoulders burn, and your mind is ready to shut down. But you won't sleep deeply. Not really. None of you will. Deep sleep is for species that aren't on the menu. You drift into a strange half-sleep state where your consciousness never fully disconnects from the world around you. Your eyes are closed, your breathing has slowed, but some ancient part of your brain remains stubbornly alert, processing every sound, every change in air pressure, every shift in the fire's warmth against your skin. This isn't restful sleep by modern standards. It's more like a controlled dimming, a temporary retreat that allows your body to repair itself while keeping the alarm system fully operational. Scientists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups have discovered that this polyphasic sleep pattern, this fragmented approach to rest, is actually humanity's original sleep architecture. The 8-hour continuous sleep cycle you've been told is natural is actually a recent invention, a luxury afforded by locked doors and absence of predators. Your fragmented sleep isn't dysfunction, it's design. After roughly 2 hours, you feel a hand on your shoulder, gentle but insistent. You open your eyes immediately, no grogginess, no confusion, just instant wakefulness that would impress any military drill sergeant. It's your cousin, a young woman named something your language can't quite pronounce, but that translates roughly to quick hands. She gestures toward the fire, then to the darkness, then back to you. It's your turn to watch. You nod, pushing yourself upright, ignoring your body's protests. This is the rotation system, humanity's first shift work, and it's the reason your band has survived 3 years in this valley, while others have been scattered or destroyed. The watch system operates on principles so obvious they're almost boring, yet they represent sophisticated social organization that required millennia to develop. Instead of everyone sleeping simultaneously, which would leave the group vulnerable, you've collectively agreed to sacrifice individual rest for communal safety. 3 people remain awake at all times during the night, positioned at different angles around the fire, their vision sectors overlapping to eliminate blind spots. Each watch lasts approximately 2 hours, though you measure time by the moon's movement rather than any clock. When your turn ends, you'll wake the next person, and the rotation continues until the eastern sky begins to pale. It's democracy born from desperation, equality enforced by mutual terror. You take your position near the cave mouth, settling onto a flat rock that experience has taught you provides the best vantage point. Your spear rests across your knees, a simple weapon by later standards but revolutionary for its time. A straight sapling shaft with a fire-hardened point that can punch through hide and muscle if you thrust hard enough. You've killed a warthog with this spear and once drove off a juvenile hyena that got too brave. The wood is smooth where your hands have gripped it thousands of times, polished by palm sweat and fear. Holding it makes you feel slightly less like prey, though you harbour no illusions about winning a straight fight against any serious predator. Your advantages are fire, numbers, and intelligence. Remove any one of those factors, and you're just meat. The night is alive with sounds that most modern humans never experience. There's the constant background chorus of insects, a pulsing throb that rises and falls like breathing. Somewhere distant, a hyena whoops, that insane laughing call that makes your skin prickle even though you've heard it 10,000 times. Closer, much closer, you hear something moving through the dry grass, a rhythmic swishing that could be anything from a porcupine to a leopard. You focus on the sound, trying to extract information from its pattern, large or small, predator or prey, coming closer or moving away. Your brain performs calculations that won't be formally understood by science for hundreds of thousands of years, running probability algorithms based on acoustic signatures, wind direction, and recent predator activity in the area. The other 2 watchers are visible in your peripheral vision. To your left sits an older man missing 2 fingers on his right hand. A crocodile claimed them years ago, a reminder that water presents its own terrors. To your right is a teenage boy on his first solo watch, his nervousness obvious in the way he keeps adjusting his grip on his club. You catch his eye and nod reassuringly, though you remember your own first watch, the way every shadow seemed to contain teeth, the way dawn felt like it would never arrive. He'll learn, or he won't survive to teach others. It's harsh arithmetic, but arithmetic doesn't care about your feelings. Historians still argue whether these watch rotations were formally organized or emerged organically, whether early humans had leaders who assigned shifts, or whether people simply volunteered based on their wakefulness. The truth probably varied by group and circumstance, but what's certain is that the system worked. Archaeological evidence from ancient campsites shows circular arrangements of sleeping areas around central hearths, with the positions clearly optimized for collective defense. Your ancestors weren't stupid, they were survival engineers, constantly iterating on designs through the brutal process of natural selection. The groups that slept poorly got eaten, the groups that organized watches survived to pass on their behavioral patterns. You're sitting here tonight because thousands of your ancestors made the same choice to sacrifice comfort for vigilance. A sound splits the night, a roar that vibrates through your chest cavity and makes your hands tighten on your spear. It's a male lion somewhere between a half-mile and a mile away announcing his presence to the world. The roar contains information. I am here. I am powerful. This territory is mine. Stay away if you're smart. But you're not staying away because you don't have anywhere else to go. This valley has water, game animals, and fruit trees. Abandoning it would mean days of dangerous travel to find another suitable location, and that location would have its own predators anyway. So instead, you make yourself as difficult a target as possible and hope the lions decide that wildebeest are easier meals than fire-wielding primates. The roar triggers a response in your body that's completely involuntary. Your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, your muscles flood with oxygen-rich blood. This is the fear response, and it's not a flaw in your design, it's a feature. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you making good decisions, keeps you from getting complacent. The humans who didn't feel appropriate fear, who strolled casually into lion territory whistling a tune, got removed from the gene pool quickly and efficiently. You're scared because your great-great-great-grandmother times 10,000 was scared, and her fear kept her alive long enough to reproduce. Congratulations! You've inherited anxiety that's been proven effective through extensive field testing. You glance back at the sleeping forms behind you. They've barely stirred at the roar. They trust the watchers to handle it, to wake them only if the threat becomes immediate. That trust is perhaps the most remarkable thing about this whole arrangement. In a world of constant danger, where a single mistake can mean death, your band members are willing to make themselves completely vulnerable based on faith that you'll do your job. It's the beginning of civilization, really. This mutual dependence, this willingness to invest in collective security rather than individual vigilance. Thousands of years from now, people will write complex philosophical treatises about social contracts and mutual obligation, but you're living the reality right now, sitting here in the dark with your spear and your drowsiness and your determination not to let down the people who are counting on you. The moon has moved approximately a hand's width across the sky, which means your watch is roughly half over. Your eyes burn from staring into the darkness, from the constant switching between watching the firelight and trying to penetrate the shadows beyond it. This is hard on your vision. The contrast between bright and dark forces your pupils to constantly adjust, never quite adapting to either condition. But looking away from the darkness isn't an option, and letting the fire die isn't either, so you endure the discomfort, because comfort is another luxury you can't afford. A small joke breaks through your concentration. You realize that in 300,000 years, Humans will pay money to sit around fires and pretend they're camping, pretend they're roughing it, then return to climate-controlled houses with deadbolted doors. They'll call it recreation, this voluntary simulation of the terror you experience as normal life. The thought is absurd enough to make you smile slightly, though you don't fully understand why you find it amusing. Humor is emerging in your species, another tool for coping with stress, another way to process the unprocessable fact that you're a soft, slow, thankless mammal trying to survive in a landscape designed to consume you. You shift your weight on the rock and the movement produces a faint echo that bounces off the cave wall behind you and travels outward into the night. The echo is subtle, barely noticeable, but it reminds you why your band chose this particular shelter over dozens of others you've explored in this valley. This cave isn't just a roof over your heads. It's an acoustic amplifier, a natural warning system that transforms tiny sounds into detectable signals. When something approaches across the rocky ground in front of the entrance, each footfall gets caught by the stone walls and magnified just enough that sleeping humans can register the disturbance. It's the difference between waking up to investigate a sound and waking up with teeth in your throat. You discovered this property accidentally 3 months ago, when a band member dropped a digging stick and the resulting clatter seemed to fill the entire space, much louder than the same action would produce in an open-air camp. That observation sparked a discussion. Your language is still limited, but you can communicate complex ideas through combinations of words, gestures, and demonstrations. Someone suggested testing different caves for this echo quality, and over the following weeks, your group systematically evaluated potential shelters by throwing rocks at their entrances and listening to how the sound behaved. The caves with the most pronounced echoes became preferred sleeping sites. You didn't understand the physics of acoustic reflection and amplification, but you didn't need to. You understood that certain caves gave you warning time, and warning time meant survival. The science behind your discovery is actually quite sophisticated, though you'll never formalize it into equations. Sound waves travel outward from their source and bounce off hard surfaces at predictable angles. In an enclosed or semi-enclosed space like your cave, these reflections overlap and reinforce each other, creating what acousticians will eventually call reverberation. The shape of your particular shelter, a shallow dome with a relatively narrow opening, acts like a primitive parabolic reflector, gathering sounds from a wide area outside and focusing them inward. When a hyena steps on a dry branch 50 feet from your entrance, the crack of breaking wood travels into the cave, bounces off the back wall, reflects off the sides, and reaches your ears from multiple directions simultaneously. Your brain interprets this as a single louder sound, and you wake up with enough time to stoke the fire and ready your weapons. Historians still argue whether early humans consciously selected shelters based on acoustic properties, or whether it was a happy accident that some groups stumbled upon and then unconsciously preferred. The archaeological record is frustratingly silent on questions of intentionality. We find the caves they used, the sleeping circles they arranged, but we can't excavate the decision-making processes that led them there. What's undeniable is that many ancient campsites show evidence of acoustic optimization, from the cave paintings at Lascaux that are positioned precisely where sound resonates most powerfully, to the rock shelters across Africa and Asia that amplify even whispered conversations. Your ancestors were listening carefully to the world, using their ears as survival tools with the same dedication they applied to their eyes and hands. You remember testing this cave with your uncle, the one who taught you most of what you know about staying alive. He stood inside while you walked progressively farther from the entrance, stomping your feet at intervals. At 20 feet he heard you clearly. At 40 feet still clear. At 60 feet, the sound was softer but distinctly recognizable. At 80 feet, it faded into the ambient noise of the savannah. That 80-foot detection radius became your safety perimeter, the invisible line beyond which threats could approach undetected. Knowing that distance changed how you positioned sentries, how you arranged the woodpile, how you oriented sleeping bodies. Information is power. Even when you don't have writing to preserve it or schools to teach it, you carry the knowledge in your muscles and instincts, passed down through demonstration and practice. The acoustic advantage works both ways, of course, which is something you discovered through near disaster. Sound travels outward from the cave just as readily as it travels inward, which means that loud conversations, crying children, or celebrations can advertise your presence to every predator within a quarter mile. This realization forced behavioral changes on your band. After sunset, everyone speaks in whispers or uses hand signals. Infants who won't stop crying are taken deeper into the cave where their voices get absorbed by the rock rather than projected outward. Arguments, and there are always arguments when you pack 20 stressed humans into close quarters, get postponed until daylight. It's social pressure enforced by mortal consequences, the kind that makes rule breakers either learn quickly or become cautionary tales. There's actually a quirky aspect to all this acoustic obsession that borders on the ridiculous. One of your band members, a middle-aged woman who's survived more seasons than anyone can count, has developed the ability to identify specific predators by the sound of their approach. She claims she can distinguish between a leopard's padding gait and a lion's heavier tread, between a hyena's loping rhythm and a wild dog's pattering run. Most of the band think she's exaggerating, showing off, but you've watched her wake up and correctly announce what's circling the camp before anyone else can confirm it. Maybe she's just guessing and getting lucky. Or maybe she's developed a genuinely useful skill through years of terrified attention to detail. Either way, when she whispers leopard, everyone believes her. Because being wrong about predator identification is a mistake you only make once. The cave's interior geography matters almost as much as its acoustics. You're positioned at the mouth, but the space extends back about 20 feet with an irregular ceiling that slopes from 10 feet high at the entrance down to barely 4 feet at the rear. This graduated height creates different acoustic zones. Sounds that originate deep in the cave stay trapped there, muffled and contained, while sounds from outside get channeled and amplified. It's almost like the cave was designed by some ancient architect who understood survival acoustics, though of course it's just geological accident, just erosion and tectonic pressure, sculpting limestone into shapes that happen to serve your needs. The universe doesn't care whether you live or die, but occasionally its random processes produce helpful coincidences, and you're smart enough to exploit them. During the day, this same cave serves multiple functions that have nothing to do with sound. The morning sun hits the entrance at an angle that warms the interior within an hour of dawn, driving away the night's chill and drying any dampness that's accumulated. The overhang provides shade during the brutal midday heat, a place to rest and doze while conserving energy for the cooler evening foraging hours. Small depressions in the floor collect rainwater that you drink with cupped hands, and there's a flat section of wall where someone has been scratching marks, counting something, maybe days or lunar cycles, creating humanity's first calendar through obsessive record-keeping that no one else really understands or cares about. You hear the echo again, a different pattern this time, multiple small sounds overlapping. Your hand tightens on your spear, and you lean forward, trying to determine direction and distance. The echoes bounce around the space, making precise location difficult, which is actually the one disadvantage of your acoustic early warning system. It tells you something is approaching, but the multiple reflections can confuse your sense of where exactly. You stand slowly, quietly, and take 2 steps forward to get a clearer angle of view beyond the firelight. The other watchers have noticed your movement and are now also alert, weapons ready, waiting for your signal about whether this is a minor disturbance or a major threat. The sounds resolve into something familiar, not a predator at all, but a small herd of gazelles moving past your position, probably heading toward water. You can hear their delicate hooves clicking on stone, can hear the occasional soft bleat of communication. They're fleeing something, moving faster than they would for casual travel, which means there's a predator somewhere in the darkness, something that spooked them into running. This is useful intelligence. If the gazelles are running east, the predator is probably west, which means you need to pay extra attention to the western approach for the next hour. You file this information away, cross-referencing it with a mental map of the terrain that you've been building since your band arrived in this valley. The moon is higher now, casting enough light that you can see vague shapes beyond the fire's glow. The twisted silhouette of an acacia tree, the jumbled rocks that mark the edge of a dry stream bed, the dark mass of thorn bush that blocks the northern approach. These landmarks are comforting in their familiarity. You've memorized every detail of this immediate landscape because knowing the terrain gives you options when crisis arrives. If a lion charges from the west, you'll run southeast where there's a cluster of boulders too tight for a large predator to navigate. If hyenas come from the east, you'll retreat southwest toward the cliff where they can't surround you. It's escape route planning, the kind of mental preparation that Olympic athletes will someday use before competitions, except your competition involves staying alive until sunrise. You wrinkle your nose at the smell that's been hanging around the cave entrance for the past 2 days. A sharp, acrid odor that's part ammonia, part musk, part something indescribably foul. It's intentional, this stench, and you're actually proud of it, even as it makes your eyes water slightly. Yesterday afternoon, your band spent 3 hours collecting dung from various animals, along with urine-soaked dirt from the latrine area where everyone relieves themselves. You mixed this delightful cocktail with ash from the fire and smeared it in a rough semicircle around the cave's perimeter, creating an olfactory barrier that broadcasts a message in the universal language of smell. Humans live here, humans mark territory, humans are dangerous. The idea came from observation, that foundation of all human innovation. You noticed that lions and leopards urinate on trees and rocks to mark their territories, and that other predators often respect these boundaries, at least temporarily. You watched hyenas deposit their white, calcium-rich droppings at territorial borders, creating visible and olfactory signposts. Even prey animals mark their spaces. Gazelles rub facial glands on branches. Elephants leave dung piles as calling cards. The entire savanna is crisscrossed with invisible scent maps that every creature can read except perhaps modern humans who've lost most of their olfactory sensitivity. But you still have it, that ability to extract information from smell, and you decided to weaponize it. The scent barrier isn't a magical force field. No lion is going to hit your stink perimeter and bounce backward like it's encountered a wall, but it does create psychological hesitation, plants a seed of doubt in a predator's mind. When a leopard approaches and catches a concentrated dose of human scent mixed with territorial markers, its brain performs a cost-benefit analysis faster than any computer. This area is claimed. The claimants are numerous enough to produce this much scent. They're bold enough to advertise their presence. Maybe easier prey exists elsewhere. Maybe that sick wildebeest down by the waterhole is a better option. The leopard doesn't think these thoughts in words, obviously, but the neural calculations produce the same result. It turns away and hunts somewhere less complicated. Your uncle taught you the finer points of scent barrier construction, knowledge he learned from his mother, who learned it from her father, stretching back through countless generations to some forgotten genius who first realized that human waste could be repurposed as a defensive tool. The key is concentration and freshness. A weak barrier, one that's too thin or too old, provides no deterrent at all. You need enough scent material to create a wall of smell, and you need to refresh it every few days as rain and wind break it down. It's maintenance work, unglamorous and literally crappy, but it's also the reason your band has experienced fewer nighttime intrusions than other groups in the region. There's actually a quirky subspecialty to this whole business that would make a modern biologist laugh and take notes simultaneously. Different predators respond differently to different scent combinations. Lions seem particularly offended by human urine mixed with ash. Something about the alkaline smell apparently triggers their avoidance instincts more than other combinations. Leopards are more deterred by fecal matter, especially if it contains undigested plant material that signals omnivorous diet rather than pure carnivore. Hyenas, those garbage disposals with legs, are hardest to discourage through smell alone because they're willing to eat practically anything from any source. For hyenas, you need to add something extra. Usually they respond to the scent of sick or diseased flesh, which you simulate by leaving small pieces of rotting meat mixed with bitter plants that smell vaguely toxic. It's prehistoric chemistry, experimental science, conducted through trial and error with potentially fatal results for incorrect formulas. Historians still argue whether early humans understood they were creating chemical deterrents or whether they simply noticed that predators avoided areas where humans had defecated and extrapolated from there. The distinction matters less than the outcome. You're sitting here alive because generations of careful observers noticed patterns and converted them into practical survival strategies. Some anthropologists have even suggested that this territorial marking behavior represented humanity's first steps toward property ownership and agriculture. You're not farming yet, not by tens of thousands of years, but you are claiming space, defending resources, establishing boundaries. The conceptual framework is being built, even if the vocabulary to describe it doesn't exist. The scent barrier has social implications beyond predator defense. It marks your band's territory to other human groups, advertising your presence and your willingness to defend this space. Human-on-human violence is already part of your reality. Not constant warfare, but occasional conflicts over resources, territories, and perceived slights that your limited language can't resolve diplomatically. Other bands know that a strong scent barrier means a strong group, one with enough members to produce substantial waste, enough organization to maintain the perimeter, enough awareness to implement defensive strategies. Weak groups don't bother with scent barriers because they're too busy simply surviving day to day. Your barrier is a status symbol, a warning, and a resume all rolled into one olfactory package. You stand and stretch, your watch shift nearly over, and walk the perimeter to inspect the barrier. In some places, the smell has faded where rain ran down the slope 2 nights ago. You make a mental note to refresh those sections tomorrow during daylight hours. In other spots, the barrier is almost too strong. Flies cluster in buzzing clouds, attracted by the organic material, and you have to wave them away as you pass. The flies are annoying but also beneficial in their own way. They're additional sentries, and when something large moves through the area, their buzzing pattern changes, providing yet another layer of sensory information. Near the eastern edge of the perimeter, you notice something interesting. Fresh lion tracks that approach to within about 15 feet of the scent barrier, circle cautiously, then retreat back the way they came. The prints are huge, probably a full-grown male, exactly the kind of predator that could devastate your band if it decided to press an attack. But it didn't. It came close enough to catch the scent, evaluate the situation, and make the rational decision that easier meals existed elsewhere. You feel a surge of satisfaction looking at those retreating prints. You've just won a battle without fighting, defeated an enemy without ever seeing it, through nothing more than strategic placement of bodily waste. It's not heroic, It's not the stuff of epic poems, but it's effective, and effectiveness is the only metric that matters when extinction is always one mistake away. The technique has its limitations, of course, which you've learned through uncomfortable experience. During the dry season, when water is scarce and your band must range farther to find it, maintaining the scent barrier becomes difficult. You're producing less urine because you're drinking less. The ground is so parched that it absorbs liquids immediately, and the wind blows harder, dispersing smells before they can concentrate. During those lean months, the barrier provides minimal protection, and your band has to rely more heavily on fire, watch rotations, and sheer luck. It's a reminder that no single defensive strategy is sufficient. Survival requires redundancy, multiple overlapping systems, so that when one fails, others can compensate. There's also the problem of habituation. If you stay in one location too long, local predators begin to recognize that the scary smell isn't backed up by consistent aggression. They probe the perimeter more boldly, testing your responses, learning that the humans behind the smell barrier are actually just as vulnerable as any other prey species. This forces your band to move periodically, abandoning perfectly good campsites and traveling to new territories where your reputation hasn't yet been degraded by familiarity. It's exhausting, this constant migration, and it's driven partly by resource depletion, but equally by the need to maintain your psychological advantage over predators who are constantly trying to solve the puzzle of how to eat you safely. You return to your watching position, satisfied that the barrier is holding. The smell has faded in your own nose. Olfactory fatigue has rendered you partially immune to the stench that probably has every predator within 100 yards, wrinkling their nostrils in disgust. This is another small biological trick, the way your scent receptors stop firing after prolonged exposure to the same smell. If you remained constantly aware of the barrier's odor, you'd never be able to detect other important smells. The smoke change that signals your fire needs feeding, the hint of rain on the wind, the distinctive musk that might indicate a predator has breached your perimeter despite your best efforts. You glance upward at the rock ledge that juts from the cave wall about 8 feet above the ground, a natural shelf barely wide enough for 2 people to lie side by side. That's where the oldest children sleep, the ones deemed too large to need constant maternal protection, but too valuable to risk on the ground level. Right now, you can see 2 figures up there, curled together for warmth, completely invisible to anything approaching from outside the cave. It's elevated sleeping, humanity's vertical solution to horizontal danger, and it represents some of your species' earliest attempts at architectural thinking. If predators hunt at ground level, the logic goes, then remove yourself from ground level. Simple, obvious, and remarkably effective. The ledge wasn't always a sleeping platform. When your band first discovered this cave, the shelf was cluttered with rocks and debris, accumulated over centuries of geological weathering. It took 3 days of work to clear it, carrying away loose stones and sweeping out the dust with bundles of grass, transforming a useless geological feature into precious real estate. The effort was worth it. Those 2 children sleeping up there are approximately 50% safer than they would be on the ground, protected not just by the height, but by the simple fact that lions and leopards, despite their athletic prowess, don't instinctively look upward when hunting. Their eyes scan the horizontal plane where prey animals normally exist. Vertical space represents a cognitive blind spot that humans learn to exploit. This wasn't your band's invention. You inherited the knowledge from previous generations who inherited it from their ancestors, stretching back to when your species first started experimenting with arboreal sleeping sites. The earliest humans, the ones who lived 5 million years ago, were still primarily tree dwellers, sleeping in branches every night the way modern chimpanzees do. As your ancestors gradually adapted to ground living, they maintained that upward-thinking orientation. That instinctive recognition that height equals safety. The ledge is a compromise between the security of trees and the convenience of caves, combining the best features of both habitats into a solution that wouldn't be fully articulated until humans started building multi-story structures tens of thousands of years later. You've slept on that ledge yourself many times, and you remember both the advantages and disadvantages with bodily clarity. The advantages are obvious. You're above the action, difficult to reach, nearly invisible in darkness. If a predator somehow penetrates your band's defenses and gets past the fire, it would take the easiest targets first, the sleeping bodies sprawled on the cave floor. By the time it noticed the ledge sleepers, the commotion would have woken everyone and organized resistance would have formed. The ledge buys time, and time is the most valuable currency in crisis situations. The disadvantages are equally memorable. The ledge is hard, offering none of the cushioning that grass mats provide, and there's always the risk of rolling off during sleep and plummeting 8 feet onto stone. One child in a neighboring band died that way last year, a nightmare scenario that led to the development of crude safety measures like positioning a sleeping adult at the ledge's edge to act as a human guardrail. Historians still argue whether elevated sleeping was an innovation or an instinct, whether humans had to consciously develop the practice, or whether it emerged naturally from primate behavioral templates. The truth is probably somewhere in between. You have instincts that make you prefer height when threatened, but you also have intelligence that converts those instincts into systematic strategies. A chimp climbs a tree when scared. You construct permanent elevated platforms and assign specific individuals to sleep there based on vulnerability assessments and social hierarchy. It's the difference between reaction and planning, between instinct and engineering. The cave ledge isn't the only elevated sleeping option your band has developed. About half a mile from here, near the river where you collect water, there's a grove of baobab trees with branches thick enough to support human weight. During the hottest months, when the cave becomes stifling and the night air near water is cooler, your band sometimes sleeps in those trees, constructing temporary platforms from woven branches and grass. It's more labor-intensive than cave sleeping. You have to rebuild the platforms regularly as materials degrade, but it offers advantages the cave can't match. In the trees, you're safe from every ground predator. Lions can't climb, hyenas can't climb. Even leopards, who are excellent climbers, rarely venture onto branches that bend and sway under their weight. Branches that might support a 120-pound human, but protest under a 150-pound cat. Tree sleeping does come with its own terrors though, specifically the snakes. Pythons hunt in trees, draping themselves along branches and striking at whatever warm-blooded creature passes within range. Your band has learned to inspect platforms carefully before settling in for the night, checking for the telltale bulge of a coiled snake or the subtle pattern of scales against bark. Once, memorably, a python did infiltrate a sleeping platform and grabbed a teenage boy around the chest. The screaming woke everyone, and in the ensuing chaos, humans shouting, beating the snake with sticks, trying to unwrap its coils, the python finally released its victim and slithered away into the darkness. The boy survived with nothing more than bruising and psychological trauma, but the incident reinforced an important lesson. No defensive strategy is perfect, and the predators are always adapting, always probing for weaknesses in your systems. There's something almost comical about the engineering challenges involved in tree platform construction, though you wouldn't have laughed at the time. Early attempts at elevated sleeping collapsed regularly, dumping sleeping humans onto the ground in the middle of the night, dangerous not because of the fall itself, but because the noise and confusion created perfect ambush conditions for any nearby predators. Your band gradually learned through repeated failure which branches could support weight, how to weave supporting structures that distributed load effectively, how to position platforms away from the trunk where snakes were most likely to travel. It's biomechanical engineering conducted entirely through trial and error, with no mathematical models or safety calculations, just practical experience purchased at the price of bruises, broken bones, and occasional deaths. The ledge sleepers above you shift position, and a small cascade of dust and pebbles rains down. You brush the debris from your hair, unbothered. This happens constantly. The ledge is never perfectly stable, and movement always dislodges something. It's actually another advantage in disguise because the falling debris serves as an alarm system. If something tried to climb up to the ledge, a leopard attempting an ambitious vertical assault, the resulting rockfall would wake everyone below. The cave itself becomes a musical instrument that plays warning songs when disturbed, every surface calibrated through accidental design to produce alerts. You remember helping a younger cousin learn to climb up to the ledge for the first time, teaching her the handholds and footholds that make the ascent possible. She was terrified, clinging to the rock face and refusing to move up or down, frozen by the height that didn't seem that significant from the ground, but felt enormous when you were actually climbing it. You talked her through it, demonstrating the movements, positioning yourself below her so she knew she wouldn't fall far if she slipped. Eventually she made it, and the pride on her face when she looked down from the ledge was visible even in firelight. She'd conquered vertical space, joined the ranks of elevated sleepers, earned a slightly safer sleeping position through courage and practiced skill. In a world without schools or formal education, that climbing lesson was her graduation ceremony. The ledge has one final advantage you haven't fully articulated but definitely understand instinctively. It's cooler up there during hot nights and warmer during cold nights. Heat rises, which means the air near the cave floor gets stifling during summer, but the ledge catches whatever breeze manages to circulate. During winter, the warm air from the fire rises and pools near the ceiling, creating a thermal blanket for the ledge sleepers, while ground-level sleepers shiver in the colder air that sinks. It's not dramatic climate control, but it's enough to make a difference in comfort. And comfort, even marginal improvement, matters when you're trying to get adequate rest while remaining alert for threats. You look back at the tangle of sleeping bodies sprawled around the fire, and what strikes you most isn't the individuals, but the formation. They're sleeping in what will eventually be called a defensive circle, though you don't have a name for it beyond the safe way. The arrangement is precise despite appearing random. Adults on the perimeter, facing outward, weapons within arm's reach. Then a ring of older children, positioned between the adults and the center. Finally, at the very heart of the formation, the youngest children and nursing infants, buried so deep in human flesh that a predator would have to go through 15 people to reach them. It's geometry as survival strategy, mathematics written in vulnerable bodies. This formation didn't emerge from a planning meeting or strategic discussion. Your language isn't sophisticated enough for that kind of abstract debate. Instead, it evolved through the brutal clarity of natural selection. Groups that slept in scattered positions, everyone choosing their own spot based on personal comfort, experienced higher predation rates. Predators would snatch the isolated sleepers first, the ones at the edges, the ones who made themselves easy targets through individualistic sleeping choices. Over generations, the groups that survived were the ones whose members instinctively clustered together, who found psychological comfort in physical proximity, who literally used each other's bodies as shields. You're sleeping this way because all your ancestors who didn't sleep this way got eaten before they could reproduce. The circle contains approximately 18 people tonight, which is close to optimal for your band's size. Too few people and the perimeter becomes thin, leaving gaps that predators could exploit. Too many people and the formation becomes unwieldy, with interior members suffocating under body heat and exterior members pushed too far from the fire's protective light. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have discovered that sleeping groups of 15 to 25 individuals appear most frequently across cultures, suggesting there's a mathematical sweet spot where collective defense balances against logistical complications. You don't know you're hitting that sweet spot. You just know that your current arrangement feels right in ways that smaller or larger groupings don't. The physical closeness is intimate in ways that would horrify modern people who've been taught that personal space is a fundamental right. You're sleeping within touching distance of nearly everyone in your band, breathing their exhaled air, feeling their body heat, smelling their unwashed skin and hair. There's no privacy, no personal boundaries, no option to retreat into solitary space when you're tired of human contact. An introvert born into your band would probably die young, unable to tolerate the constant proximity that survival demands. But you're not thinking about personality types or individual preferences. You're thinking about the fact that this pressing closeness means someone will always feel a predator's approach before it reaches the vulnerable center, will always raise the alarm before disaster becomes irreversible. The arrangement has social implications beyond defense. By sleeping in this formation night after night, your band reinforces its cohesion, literally binds itself together through shared vulnerability. You know these people not just through daytime interactions, but through the intimate knowledge of how they sleep, who snores, who thrashes, who whimpers from nightmares, who wakes at the slightest sound. This information builds empathy and understanding in ways that casual acquaintance can't match. When you've spent 1,000 nights pressed against someone's back, feeling their breathing slow into sleep rhythms, you develop bonds that transcend language and conscious thought. It's enforced intimacy, and it creates tribal loyalty stronger than any oath or contract. There's a specific hierarchy to the sleeping circle that everyone understands without needing explanation. The strongest, most skilled fighters sleep on the outer ring. That's where threats will hit first, where combat capability matters most. The elderly and injured sleep in the second ring where they're protected but can still contribute if needed, handing weapons forward or pulling children deeper into the center during attacks. Pregnant women sleep in the innermost ring alongside infants, their reproductive value to the band's survival calculating their position with ruthless efficiency. Nobody voted on this arrangement. Nobody debated its fairness. It emerged from cold logic. Protect the irreplaceable, position the expendable where they can absorb the first shock of violence. You remember your own progression through the rings as you've aged. As a small child, you slept at the center, surrounded by warmth and protection, barely aware that danger existed beyond the wall of adults. As you grew, you moved outward, first to the children's ring where you learned to wake quickly when alarms sounded, then to the outer ring when you reached fighting age and received your first weapons. Each transition was a rite of passage, an acknowledgement of changing status and capability. Someday, if you survive long enough and accumulate enough injuries to reduce your effectiveness, you'll move back inward to the protected rings, completing the circle of life in its most literal form. Historians still argue whether these sleeping formations were instinctive or learned, whether humans naturally clustered this way or whether it required cultural transmission and teaching. The evidence suggests both. You have primate instincts that make you seek proximity when threatened, but you also have cultural knowledge that specifies exactly how to arrange that proximity for maximum defensive effectiveness. A frightened chimp will huddle with others. A frightened human will huddle with others in a strategically optimized formation that reflects thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about predator behavior and group dynamics. The formation has one quirk that borders on the absurd, the snoring problem. In a sleeping circle of 18 people, at least 3 or 4 are going to be snorers, their nighttime breathing producing sounds that range from gentle whistling to full-throated roaring that rivals the lions you're trying to avoid. This creates genuine security issues because snoring masks other sounds. makes it harder for the watchers to hear approaching threats. Your band has developed an informal snorer management system where heavy snorers are positioned on specific sides of the circle, angled so their noise projects away from the watchers rather than toward them. Sometimes, when a snorer is particularly loud, someone will reach over and gently reposition their head, changing the angle of their airway enough to reduce the volume. It's intimate, slightly invasive, and absolutely necessary. You can't let personal dignity or privacy concerns override practical survival needs. The circle also generates its own microclimate, a bubble of warmer, more humid air that hovers over the sleeping mass. 18 human bodies, each generating about 100 watts of heat, collectively produce a significant thermal output that modifies the immediate environment. During cold nights, this shared warmth can be the difference between comfortable sleep and hypothermic misery. People on the outer ring suffer more from cold exposure, but they compensate by rotating positions periodically, moving from outside to inside and back again so that no one bears the thermal burden all night. It's fairness enforced by shared misery. Everyone takes turns being cold, everyone takes turns being warm, and the system maintains itself through mutual self-interest. You notice a small disturbance in the formation. One of the children, perhaps 3 years old, has somehow migrated from the center toward the edge during sleep, rolling unconsciously toward the perimeter. Her mother wakes instantly, some maternal radar detecting the displacement, and gently pulls the child back to safety without fully waking either of them. It's a small moment, easily missed, but it illustrates the constant vigilance that underlies even sleep. Nobody is ever truly unconscious. Nobody ever fully disengages from the group's security needs. Your brains remain partially active, monitoring positions, detecting anomalies, ready to respond to threats or breaches in the defensive formation. The arrangement requires trust that modern individualists might find incomprehensible. You're trusting the perimeter guards to stay awake and alert. They're trusting interior sleepers not to panic and create chaos if trouble arrives. Everyone is trusting everyone else not to steal resources, not to take advantage of vulnerability, not to prioritize personal safety over group survival. This trust isn't naive or sentimental, it's calculated reciprocity, backed by the knowledge that betrayal would result in exile, and exile means death. You cooperate because defection isn't a viable strategy when predators are always circling, always waiting for isolated individuals to exploit. Your hand rests on your spear even as you sit watching, fingers curved around the shaft in a grip that's become so habitual you barely register it anymore. The weapon is an extension of your arm, present during every sleeping hour, positioned so that your hand naturally falls upon it whenever you startle awake. You've slept holding weapons for so many years that the few times you've accidentally fallen asleep without one, you've woken in immediate panic, reaching for absent wood and finding only empty air. It's weapon hoarding taken to psychological extremes, but it's also completely rational when you consider that the gap between detecting a threat and responding to it might be measured in seconds. The spear itself is crude by later standards, just a straight wooden shaft about 5 feet long with one end sharpened and hardened in fire until the point becomes dense and dark. There's no metal tip, no sophisticated binding, no decorative carving, but it's deadly if you know how to use it, capable of punching through hide and muscle and reaching vital organs if you thrust with enough force and accuracy. You've practiced the motion thousands of times during daylight hours, stabbing at targets made from bundles of grass, learning the angle and power needed to make the weapon effective. The practice is boring, repetitive work that makes your shoulders ache, but boredom is preferable to fumbling your strike when a hyena is lunging at your throat. Every adult in your band sleeps with a weapon within reach, spears for most, but also clubs made from heavy hardwood, rocks selected for their perfect hand-filling shape and weight, even sharpened digging sticks that can serve double duty as stabbing implements. The children have smaller versions, training weapons that let them develop muscle memory and confidence, The youngest children, though still too small to wield anything effectively, sleep with nothing, their only defense being their position deep within the protective rings of armed adults. This universal armament represents a significant investment of time and resources. Each weapon requires hours to construct, maintain, and replace when it breaks or wears out, but the alternative is being defenseless, and defenselessness is suicide. The weapons serve multiple psychological functions beyond their practical combat utility. Simply holding a spear makes you feel less vulnerable, shifts your mental state from prey to potential predator. This isn't delusion, you're still vastly outmatched by lions in individual combat, but the weapon provides a sense of agency that pure helplessness would destroy. Humans can't survive psychologically as pure victims. You need to believe you can fight back, even when the odds are terrible. The spear in your hand whispers lies that keep you sane. You're dangerous, you're capable, you can defend yourself. The lies are comforting even when you suspect they're mostly untrue. Your band's weapons are stored strategically around the sleeping area, creating a distributed arsenal that ensures everyone can access something quickly regardless of where they're positioned. There's a pile of throwing rocks near the cave entrance, selected for their aerodynamic shape and stacked for quick grabbing. A row of spears leans against the wall, where multiple people can reach them simultaneously without interfering with each other. Several heavy clubs rest on the ground, positioned at cardinal points around the sleeping circle like compass markers. This distribution wasn't designed through formal planning. It evolved through repeated emergencies where people discovered they were too far from weapons when they needed them most urgently. Historians still argue whether early humans slept with weapons as a cultural practice or an instinctive response to threat. The archaeological record provides ambiguous evidence. Weapons are found at habitation sites, but it's impossible to determine whether they were kept close during sleep or stored separately during non-threatening periods. What's clear from studying modern hunter-gatherers is that weapon proximity during vulnerable hours is nearly universal across cultures, suggesting either common ancestry or convergent evolution of the same survival strategy. Either way, you're repeating patterns that are either ancient instinct or ancient wisdom, and the distinction doesn't particularly matter when a leopard is testing your perimeter. There's actually something darkly humorous about how familiar you've become with your weapon, how it's achieved almost companionship status. You know, this particular spear's balance point, the slight curve in its shaft, the rough patch where bark wasn't completely removed. You've given it a sort of personality in your mind, though you don't have language sophisticated enough to articulate the relationship. When you eventually break or lose this spear, you'll feel genuine loss. Not for the object itself, but for the accumulated muscle memory, the practice familiarity that made it feel like part of your body. The replacement spear will be functionally identical but feel wrong for weeks until your hands and brain adapt to its particular characteristics. The weapon maintenance is constant and tedious. Wooden spears split along the grain, requiring replacement or repair. The fire-hardened points wear down with use, needing to be resharpened by reheating and scraping. Clubs crack from striking hard surfaces. Throwing stones chip and break. You spend at least an hour most days on weapon upkeep, work that produces no food and provides no immediate reward but that absolutely cannot be neglected. It's like dental hygiene in that respect. Boring maintenance that prevents catastrophic future problems. Except in your case, the catastrophic problem isn't cavities, but getting disemboweled because your spear point broke at the critical moment. Your band has developed a crude quality control system for weapons, though you'd never call it that. The most skilled weapon makers, usually older individuals who've lost the physical capability for hunting but retain excellent fine motor control and judgment, inspect everyone's weapons periodically, identifying problems before they become failures. A spear with an incipient crack gets flagged for replacement. A club with a loosening grip gets rewrapped with fresh sinew. Throwing stones that have chipped into awkward shapes get discarded and replaced with better specimens. This informal inspection system prevents the nightmare scenario where multiple weapons fail during a single emergency because everyone was too busy or lazy to maintain their equipment properly. The weapons also serve as status markers and teaching tools. The best-made spears belong to the most skilled hunters, and younger band members study these superior examples, trying to understand what makes them effective. Is it the straightness of the shaft, the taper of the point, the specific hardness achieved through fire treatment? You learn through observation and imitation, gradually developing your own weapon-making skills through practice that spans years. There are no instruction manuals, no formal apprenticeships, just watching and copying and adjusting, and based on whether your creations work or fail when tested in actual combat situations. You adjust your grip on the spear, shifting it slightly to prevent your hand from falling asleep. This is the eternal balance of weapon holding during rest periods. You need the weapon close enough to grab instantly, but holding it constantly creates muscle fatigue that reduces your effectiveness. You've developed a compromise position where the spear rests across your lap with one hand loosely touching it. Maintaining contact without requiring active gripping is efficient enough that you can maintain the position for your entire watch shift without significant discomfort, though your shoulder will still ache by morning because there's no perfectly comfortable way to spend 2 hours sitting alert with a weapon. The youngest children don't understand weapons yet. They see adults constantly holding these objects and naturally want to imitate, grabbing at spears and clubs with clumsy, dangerous enthusiasm. Teaching them weapon respect is critical and challenging because your language can't easily convey abstract concepts like "this is dangerous" or "you'll hurt yourself." Instead, you teach through demonstration, showing them small, controlled injuries, a poked finger, a minor scrape, that create associations between weapons and pain without causing serious harm. It's learned through consequence education, harsh but effective in a world where there's no room for gentle progressive pedagogy. Let me add more to reach the target length. You've noticed that weapon grip changes based on perceived threat level. During calm periods, you hold the spear loosely, almost casually. When sounds suggest potential danger, your grip automatically tightens, knuckles going white, body tensing into readiness. When threats recede, you consciously have to remind yourself to loosen your hold, to let blood flow back into your fingers. This constant tension adjustment is exhausting in ways that pure physical labor isn't. It's the mental fatigue of sustained vigilance, of never quite relaxing because relaxation might mean death. You tilt your head, listening to a series of roars echoing across the savannah, and your brain automatically begins processing the information contained in those sounds. This isn't the first line vocalization you've heard tonight, but this sequence is different. 3 roars in quick succession, each slightly higher pitch than the last, coming from the same direction but moving closer. Your body responds before your conscious mind finishes analyzing the pattern. Muscles tense, breathing shallows, attention narrows to laser focus. These aren't territorial roars, the kind lions broadcast to announce their presence and warn competitors away. These are hunting roars, communication between pride members coordinating an attack on something large and dangerous that requires teamwork to bring down. The distinction matters enormously because it tells you whether the lions are preoccupied with other prey, or whether they might be hunting your band. Territorial roars happen throughout the night as males patrol their domains, marking boundaries through sound. They're intimidating but not immediately threatening. A lion announcing his presence is generally too busy defending territory to bother with hunting. Hunting roars are different, purposeful and focused, and they create a calculation in your mind. What are they hunting? Where is it located? Will their pursuit bring them close to your position? You're reading the acoustic landscape the way a modern city dweller reads traffic lights, extracting survival-critical information from sounds that contain entire narratives if you know how to listen. Your education in predator vocalizations began in childhood, when adults would pause during daily activities to point out distant sounds and explain their meanings through gestures and simple words. A lion's roar when it's made a kill sounds triumphant, almost relaxed. A deep, satisfied rumble that signals the hunt is over and feeding has begun. A lion's roar when it's been injured or challenged sounds strained and aggressive, higher pitched with an edge of distress. A lioness calling to separated cubs produces a specific chuffing sound, rhythmic and questioning. A male lion defending a kill from scavengers produces short, sharp roars that sound almost like coughs. You learned these distinctions the way modern children learn to distinguish car horns from sirens from doorbells, through constant exposure and correction when you misidentified sounds. The roars have stopped now, replaced by a different sound, the unmistakable noise of large bodies moving through brush, breaking branches, disturbing vegetation. Something is running, probably a zebra or wildebeest based on the heavy, rhythmic pounding of hooves on hard ground. The lions are in pursuit, still far enough away that you can't see anything but close enough that the chase is unfolding within your auditory range. You track the movement through sound alone, creating a mental map of the action. Prey running southeast, lions following, the gap between them closing. Then a new sound, a scream, high-pitched and terrible that cuts off abruptly. The lions have made their kill, and the night returns to quieter sounds. Growling, snarling, the wet noises of feeding. This acoustic information is valuable because it tells you the lions will be occupied for the next several hours, gorging themselves on fresh meat, fighting among themselves over the best portions, eventually settling into food comas that render them temporarily harmless. A fed lion is a non-threatening lion, at least for the immediate future. Your watch shift can relax slightly, though you'll never fully lower your guard because other predators exist, and because lions aren't the only dangers prowling the darkness. Still, knowing that the major threat in your sector is currently distracted by dinner provides psychological relief that's almost physical, a loosening of tension you didn't fully realize you were carrying. Historians still argue whether early humans could really extract this much information from animal vocalizations, or whether modern interpretations overestimate our ancestors' acoustic literacy. The evidence from contemporary hunter-gatherer groups suggests that sound interpretation skills in pre-literate cultures far exceed what urbanized humans can comprehend. People who've spent their entire lives listening carefully to environmental sounds, whose survival depends on accurate interpretation, develop abilities that seem almost superhuman to those who've lost these skills through technological dependence. You're not doing anything magical. You're just paying attention with an intensity and consistency that modern distracted humans rarely achieve. The predator sound vocabulary extends beyond lions. Leopard vocalizations are completely different, a rasping, soaring cough that sounds more mechanical than biological, like wood being cut with a dull blade. The first time you heard it as a child, you didn't recognize it as an animal sound at all. Thought maybe it was wind through hollow logs or rocks grinding together. Leopards are largely silent hunters, preferring stealth to communication, but they do vocalize during territorial disputes and mating season, producing that distinctive rasp that once heard is never forgotten or confused with anything else. Hyena sounds are perhaps the most varied and disturbing in your acoustic environment. Their famous laugh isn't really laughter, it's a signal of frustration or submission, usually heard when a lower-ranking hyena is being displaced from food by a more dominant individual. When hyenas are truly hunting or fighting, they produce whoops, growls, and screams that range from almost human-sounding to utterly alien. You've learned to distinguish between the whoop of a hyena that's found food and is calling the clan, and the whoop of a hyena that's spotted potential prey and is organizing a hunt. The former means you might be able to scavenge scraps after they're finished. The latter means you need to ensure you're not the potential prey they've spotted. There are also the sounds that signal not predators but danger of different kinds. the trumpeting alarm call of elephants when they are agitated, which means stay far away because angry elephants kill more humans than any predator. The warning bark of baboons who've spotted a threat, which is useful because baboons have excellent eyesight and often spot predators before humans do. The distinctive alarm calls of various antelope species, each producing a different sound that tells you what kind of predator they've detected. A sharp whistle for aericel predators like eagles, a snort for ground predators like lions, a different call for ambush predators like leopards. You're plugged into an information network that spans species, using other animals' alarm systems as extensions of your own sensory apparatus. The acoustic reading goes both ways. You're not just interpreting sounds, you're producing them strategically. When your band wants to discourage predators without direct confrontation, you make noise deliberately. Loud talking, wood-chopping sounds, even coordinated shouting can convince nearby predators that a large, confident group of humans occupies the area, making them reconsider their hunting plans. It's psychological warfare through sound, advertising strength and numbers and willingness to fight. Sometimes you bang rocks together rhythmically, creating sounds that no natural animal produces, which triggers uncertainty in predator minds. Uncertainty that often translates into caution and withdrawal. There's a quirky aspect to all this acoustic awareness that borders on the obsessive. Some band members develop specializations, becoming recognized experts at identifying specific animals by sound alone. Your uncle can identify individual lions by their roars, claims he can hear subtle differences in pitch and rhythm that distinguish one male from another. Whether this is true or whether he's just very good at extrapolating from other contextual clues doesn't really matter. The band trusts his assessments, and his confidence becomes everyone's confidence. When he says, "That's the old male from the Western Territory, he won't come closer," everyone relaxes slightly, believing his expertise even if the expertise itself is partly performance. You've also learned to read the meta sounds, the patterns created by absence rather than presence. When the normal nighttime chorus of insects and small mammals suddenly stops, when silence falls across the landscape like a blanket, that silence screams danger more loudly than any roar, something has disturbed the ecosystem, something significant enough that dozens of species have simultaneously decided that staying silent and still is preferable to normal activity, that something is usually a large predator moving through the area, and the expanding wave of silence tracks its movement as clearly as footprints in mud. You listen to the silence, tracking where it spreads, estimating trajectory and speed, preparing responses based on acoustic negative space. You glance upward at the moon, nearly full tonight, hanging in the sky like a pale eye watching everything below with impartial indifference. The bright moonlight transforms the landscape from absolute darkness into a silver-washed world where you can actually see shapes and shadows beyond the fire's glow. The acacia trees standing like skeletal sentinels, the rocky outcrops that mark territorial boundaries, even the movement of larger animals crossing open ground. This visibility feels like a gift, a reprieve from the usual blindness that night imposes. But you know from hard experience that full moons are actually more dangerous than dark ones, and your band has adjusted its behavior accordingly. The danger comes from the predator's perspective, not yours. Lions hunt primarily by sight, using their excellent night vision to spot prey against the horizon, to detect movement in grass, to coordinate attacks through visual communication between pride members. During dark new moons, their visual advantage is minimized. They can still see better than you in low light, but the extreme darkness levels the playing field somewhat, forces them to hunt more cautiously, reduces their success rates. But during full moons like tonight, the landscape becomes a killing field optimized for visual predators. Everything stands out in the silver light. The shape of an antelope grazing, the movement of a warthog trotting towards water, the silhouettes of humans sleeping around a fire. Lions hunt more successfully during bright moon phases, which means they're more active, more confident, more likely to test the defenses of potential prey, including your band. Your group's response to moon phases is sophisticated enough that future anthropologists will debate whether it represents true lunar calendar awareness or just pattern recognition without deeper understanding. The truth is somewhere in between. You don't have a written calendar, can't predict exactly when the next full moon will occur, but you do track the moon's shape through its monthly cycle and adjust behaviors based on its phase. During the 3 nights surrounding the full moon, your band doubles the watch rotation, ensuring 4 people remain awake instead of the usual 3. You build the fire larger, consuming precious fuel reserves but creating a bigger defensive perimeter. You don't travel to new campsites during full moon periods, preferring to stay in familiar, defensible positions where you know the terrain and escape routes intimately. The moon's influence extends beyond just predator activity. It affects your entire circadian rhythm and sleep architecture. During bright moon phases, everyone sleeps more lightly, wakes more frequently, experiences more fragmented rest. This isn't entirely voluntary. The moonlight itself suppresses melatonin production in your brain, making deep sleep harder to achieve even when you're exhausted. Modern sleep scientists studying this phenomenon call it the lunar effect, and they've confirmed that humans still respond to moon phases even when sleeping indoors behind blackout curtains, suggesting the response is partly genetic rather than purely environmental. You're experiencing what your descendants will eventually measure with electroencephalograms and sleep tracking apps. The ancient human sleep cycle synchronized to lunar phases because that synchronization provided survival advantages. Historians still argue whether early humans were consciously aware of the statistical correlation between moon phases and predator activity, or whether they just noticed that bright nights felt more dangerous and responded instinctively. Probably it was both. You noticed that attacks seemed to happen more frequently during full moons without necessarily understanding the underlying mechanism. You don't know that lions hunt visually or that moonlight enhances their capabilities. You just know, through accumulated experience and stories from other bands, that bright nights are more dangerous nights, and you adjust accordingly. Sometimes practical wisdom precedes theoretical understanding by thousands of years. The moonlight creates optical effects that are both beautiful and terrifying. Shadows become deeper and more sharply defined, creating contrast that makes it harder to distinguish real threats from harmless shapes. That bush 30 feet away, is it just a bush, or is something crouched behind it using the vegetation as concealment? The shadow behind that rock, is it empty darkness? Or does it contain a leopard's form, perfectly still, waiting for someone to make a mistake? Your eyes play tricks during moonlit nights, seeing threats that don't exist while simultaneously failing to spot real dangers that blend into the silver and black landscape. You learn to trust movement more than shape, to wait for things to shift position before categorizing them as threat or non-threat. The moon's position also affects your band's travel decisions during the day. When you know a full moon is approaching, you try to position yourselves in the most defensible location possible, ideally near the cave with the good acoustics, or near water sources where you can reduce your range of movement and consolidate defenses. Conversely, during new moon periods when darkness is maximal and predator hunting success drops, you take more risks, traveling longer distances, exploring new territories, making the kinds of moves that would be suicidal during bright moon phases. It's risk management calibrated to celestial mechanics, and it works because the pattern is consistent. The moon's cycle is one of the few truly reliable patterns in a chaotic, dangerous world. There's something almost comforting about the moon's predictability, actually. So much of your life is unpredictable, whether you'll find food tomorrow, whether predators will attack tonight, whether someone in your band will get injured or sick. But the moon follows an absolutely reliable schedule. waxing and waning with mechanical precision that you can observe and anticipate. This predictability lets you plan, gives you a framework for organizing activities across longer time spans than just tomorrow's immediate survival. You're developing proto-astronomy without telescopes or mathematics, using nothing but naked eye observation and mental record keeping that spans multiple cycles. The full moon also affects predator behavior in ways that work to your advantage sometimes. Prey animals are more alert during bright nights. They can see predators approaching and respond faster, making hunts more difficult and energy-intensive. This means predators often try to hunt during the hours immediately after sunset or before dawn, during the transition periods when light levels are changing rapidly and prey eyes are still adjusting. Your band exploits this by being maximally alert during those transition hours, relaxing slightly during the midnight period, when even opportunistic predators are somewhat less active. It's not a perfect system, predators will hunt whenever opportunity presents, but the pattern is consistent enough to base strategies around. You've noticed that some predators actually avoid hunting during full moons, preferring darker nights when their prey can't see them approaching. Leopards, in particular, seem to prefer darker conditions for hunting, probably because their ambush strategy depends heavily on not being spotted until the final pounce. This means that during full moons, your threat profile shifts slightly. More concern about lions and hyenas who hunt actively, less concern about leopards who hunt through stealth. Not that you ever completely dismiss leopard danger, but you allocate your attention differently based on these observed patterns. The moon's psychological effects shouldn't be underestimated either. Bright moonlight makes you feel less isolated, less surrounded by infinite darkness, more connected to the visible world. This psychological comfort reduces stress, lowers cortisol levels, improves decision-making under pressure. Yes, the moon makes you more visible to predators, but it also makes you more visible to yourself and your band members, strengthens social bonds through the simple fact of being able to see each other's faces instead of just hearing disembodied voices in darkness. The human need for light goes beyond practical visibility. It touches something deeper, some primate instinct that associates darkness with vulnerability and light with safety. Tonight's full moon means you'll probably sleep less than 4 hours total, fragmented across multiple wake-sleep cycles, never really achieving the deep rest your body craves. Tomorrow you'll be tired, slow, irritable, operating on reduced capacity, but you'll be alive, which is more than could be said for the bands that don't adjust their behavior to lunar cycles, that treat all nights as equally dangerous. Your great-great-grandmother learned these lessons through survival. Your grandmother reinforced them through repetition. Your mother taught them to you through demonstration, and you'll pass them to the next generation through the same process. It's oral tradition encoded in behavior rather than words. Knowledge transmission that requires no literacy or formal education. You hear a soft whimpering from the sleeping circle and immediately recognize it as one of the younger children having a nightmare, probably reliving some frightening encounter from earlier in the day. The child's mother responds instantly, pulling the small body closer, making soothing sounds that are more rhythm than language, stroking the child's head with practiced motions that calm without fully waking. Within moments the whimpering stops, and the child settles back into deeper sleep, the nightmare interrupted before it could escalate into full-blown screaming that would wake everyone and potentially advertise your location to anything prowling nearby. This is children's sleep training in action, and it represents some of the most critical education your band provides to its youngest members. The training begins essentially at birth, though the earliest lessons are absorbed unconsciously rather than taught explicitly. Infants learn that certain sounds, a mother's shushing, a particular humming tone, the crackling of fire, mean safety and should not trigger alarm responses. Other sounds, sudden sharp noises, unfamiliar vocalizations, changes in the adult's breathing patterns, should trigger immediate alertness even during sleep. Babies who can't learn these distinctions, who cry persistently at inappropriate times, or who sleep too deeply to wake when danger approaches, represent survival risks to the entire band. The harsh reality is that such infants often don't survive past their first year, not through deliberate action, but through natural consequences when their behavior attracts predators or prevents the band from moving quickly during emergencies. As children grow past infancy into toddlerhood, the training becomes more explicit and more demanding. They're taught to freeze absolutely still when adults make a specific hissing sound that means predator nearby. The first few times you teach this, the child's natural instinct is to run toward the parent for protection. But running creates movement that predators detect instantly. So you practice repeatedly during safe daylight hours, making the freeze signal and rewarding stillness with praise and affection, correcting movement with stern disapproval. It's operant conditioning before anyone invented the term, behavioral modification through consistent reinforcement until the response becomes automatic, overriding natural panic instincts. The freeze training has saved countless lives over generations, including possibly your own when you were small. You have a vague memory from early childhood. You couldn't have been more than 4 years old, of crouching behind a termite mound while a pride of lions passed within 20 feet of your position. Your mother had given the freeze signal, and you'd obeyed instantly, becoming so still that you barely breathed, watching through slitted eyes as massive cats prowled past, utterly unaware of your presence. The memory is fragmented and dreamlike, possibly distorted by time and retelling, but the emotional core remains vivid. The terror of proximity to apex predators, the trust that staying frozen would save you, the relief when they passed without incident. That experience encoded the freeze response deep into your neural architecture, where it remains ready for instant deployment. Older children, those past about 6 or 7 years, receive more advanced training in threat assessment and appropriate responses. They learn to distinguish between sounds that require freezing versus sounds that require alerting adults versus sounds that are harmless background noise. A lion's roar at 300 yards, monitor but don't panic. A lion's roar at 50 yards, freeze and prepare for potential conflict. A lion's roar inside the defensive perimeter, scream immediately to wake everyone and prepare for coordinated defense. These distinctions seem obvious to adults who've internalized them over decades, but they're genuinely difficult for children whose threat assessment systems are still developing. You teach through repetition, quizzing children during safe times about what they should do in various scenarios, correcting mistakes before those mistakes happen in life-threatening contexts. Historians still argue whether this level of systematic child training represents true pedagogy or just instinctive parenting responses to environmental pressures. The truth is probably that parents don't think of themselves as conducting education in any formal sense. They're just doing what seems necessary to keep children alive, repeating lessons they themselves learned in childhood. But the systematization is real. Specific signals, consistent responses, progressive skill development based on age and capability. It's a curriculum designed by natural selection, refined through thousands of generations of trial and error, where the errors resulted in dead children and the successes resulted in your existence. One particularly crucial lesson involves teaching children not to cry out when they're startled awake. This is incredibly difficult because the startle response, sudden noise causing instant vocalization, is deeply hardwired into primate neurology. Babies scream when startled. It's automatic and nearly universal, but a child who screams every time they wake from the nightmare or get jostled by a shifting sleeper creates constant security risks, broadcasting the band's location and vulnerable state to anything listening. So parents work patiently to override this instinct, teaching children to wake silently, to assess the situation before making noise, to default to quiet alertness rather than vocal alarm. It takes years for most children to master this skill, and even then, The occasional nightmare can trigger a cry before conscious control kicks in. The training includes positive reinforcement that modern parenting experts would recognize and approve of. Children who demonstrate good threat responses, who freeze correctly, who wake silently, who show appropriate caution without paralyzing fear, receive praise and elevated status within the juvenile hierarchy. They get first choice of sleeping positions in the protected center, receive extra food portions, get to participate in activities normally reserved for older children. This creates peer pressure toward competence. Children compete to demonstrate their mastery of survival skills because mastery earns rewards and social standing. It's gamification before games existed, turning life or death skills into achievement systems that motivate learning through ego and ambition rather than just fear. There's also negative reinforcement, though it's usually social rather than physical. A child who panics unnecessarily, who cries at harmless sounds, who runs when they should freeze, gets mocked by other children and receives disappointed looks from adults. In a society where reputation and standing within the band determine access to resources and protection, social disapproval is genuinely painful, genuinely motivating. You don't need to hit children to teach them. The shame of being labelled a coward or a fool in front of the group provides motivation powerful enough to override instinct and reshape behaviour. It's cruel by modern standards, but effectiveness matters more than emotional comfort when extinction is the alternative to competence. Some children never fully master the training. They remain jumpy, vocal, prone to panic despite years of instruction and reinforcement. These children represent dilemmas for the band because they're genetic relatives, deserving of protection and resources, but they're also liabilities that increase everyone's danger. Usually such children are kept closer to adults, given less freedom to move independently, assigned to the most protected positions during sleep and travel. They're accommodated because abandoning children violates some deep human instinct toward nurturing. But they are also limited because their weaknesses can't be allowed to threaten the group's survival. It's a compromise between compassion and pragmatism that satisfies neither value completely. You remember teaching your younger cousin the freeze response last year, a little girl of perhaps 5 who kept wanting to run to her mother whenever anything scared her. You spent weeks working with her, playing games where you'd make sudden sounds and reward her for staying still, gradually increasing the intensity until she could handle genuinely frightening noises without bolting. The breakthrough came one evening when a hyena whooped nearby and she froze automatically, without conscious thought, her body executing the trained response before her fear could override it. The pride on her face when you praised her afterward was beautiful, a child discovering her own competence and courage. She's sleeping in the protected ring tonight, still vulnerable but increasingly capable, her survival odds improving with each successful lesson absorbed. You add another branch to the fire, watching carefully as the flames accept the new fuel and begin consuming it with hungry efficiency. This is maybe the 20th time you fed the fire tonight, and you'll probably feed it 20 more times before dawn arrives and releases you from this responsibility. Fire maintenance is boring, repetitive work that requires constant attention without providing any sense of accomplishment. The fire never gets done, never reaches a state where you can declare victory and move on to other tasks. It just keeps burning and demanding more fuel, an infant that will die if you stop feeding it, and if it dies, you might die shortly afterward when the predators realize the protective barrier has vanished. The fire maintenance skills you've developed are actually quite sophisticated, though you'd never articulate them as principles or rules. You know instinctively that different woods burn at different rates. The dense hardwoods from acacia trees burn slowly and produce long-lasting coals, while dried grass and small twigs burn quickly and provide immediate flame but little sustained heat. You layer your fuel strategically, grass and twigs on top for visible flame that frightens predators and provides light, larger branches in the middle for sustained burning, heavy logs at the base that smoulder for hours and provide foundational heat. This layering creates a fire that's both visually impressive and thermally efficient, maximizing deterrent effect while minimizing fuel consumption. The wood gathering itself represents enormous labor investment that people from later eras would find almost incomprehensible. Your band collectively spends roughly 10 to 15 hours per week just collecting deadwood, testing pieces for dryness and density, carrying them back to camp and storing them where rain won't spoil them. That's 10 to 15 hours that could be spent foraging for food, making tools, resting, socializing, any of the dozens of other activities that compete for your limited time and energy. But you spend those hours gathering wood because the alternative is having no fire, and having no fire means almost certain death within days or weeks at most. It's the highest priority task your band performs, the non-negotiable foundation that all other survival strategies rest upon. Keeping fire alive through weather challenges is where the maintenance becomes genuinely difficult. Rain is the obvious enemy. Water extinguishes fire through basic physics that you don't understand theoretically, but know intimately through experience. When rain threatens, you take elaborate precautions, building shelters over the fire using branches and hides, moving burning logs under rock overhangs where precipitation can't reach them, surrounding the fire with stone barriers that block wind-driven rain. During heavy downpours, maintaining fire becomes a full-time job for multiple people working in shifts, constantly adjusting shelters, rotating wet wood for dry reserves, nursing struggling flames back to strength. You've spent entire nights crouched over smoking embers during storms, blowing gently to keep them alive, feeding them with the tiniest scraps of dry tinder until conditions improved enough for the fire to recover. Wind presents different challenges. It can strengthen fire dangerously, blowing sparks into sleeping areas or surrounding vegetation and creating uncontrolled blazes that threaten the band. But wind can also extinguish fire by dispersing heat faster than fuel can regenerate it, essentially freezing the combustion reaction through aggressive cooling. You've learned to build windbreaks from rocks and logs, creating protected microclimates where fire can burn steadily regardless of surrounding conditions. The windbreak placement requires understanding of how air currents flow around obstacles, knowledge you've gained through observation rather than fluid dynamics equations. Place the windbreak incorrectly and you create turbulence that makes the problem worse. Place it correctly and you create a calm pocket where fire thrives. Historians still argue whether early humans understood fire's chemistry, whether they knew fire required fuel, heat and oxygen, or whether they just knew fire needed feeding and breathing without grasping the underlying mechanisms. You certainly don't know about oxidation reactions or combustion temperatures, but you do know that smothering fire with dirt extinguishes it by cutting off air, that wet wood won't burn until it dries, that blowing on embers makes them glow brighter. Your mental model of fire is functional rather than theoretical, focused entirely on practical manipulation without any interest in abstract understanding. The physics can remain mysterious as long as your techniques work reliably. The fire's social dimension extends beyond pure survival function. It's also the band's gathering point, the communal space where relationships form and information gets shared. During evening hours before sleep, everyone clusters around the fire, working on tools, telling stories through gesture and simple language, watching children play in the safe illuminated space. The fire creates a micro-society, a bubble of civilization carved from hostile wilderness, and maintaining it is therefore maintaining not just safety but social cohesion itself. When the fire burns strong, the band feels unified and capable. When the fire weakens, anxiety spreads and unity fragments as everyone focuses on individual survival rather than collective well-being. There's actually something mesmerizing about fire that affects human psychology at deep neurological levels. Watching flames produces a mild trance state, reducing stress hormones and promoting relaxation despite the dangerous environment. Modern researchers studying this phenomenon have found that even urban humans watching video footage of fires experience measurable psychological benefits. decreased blood pressure, reduced anxiety, improved mood. You're receiving the original version of this therapy, not a recorded simulation, but actual dancing flames that have kept your species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Your brain recognizes fire as safety, releases neurochemicals that reinforce attention and positive associations, essentially programs you to love and maintain the very thing that keeps predators away. The fire maintenance also creates a mentorship chain, where knowledge passes from experienced firekeepers to apprentices learning the craft. Older band members, those whose hunting days are behind them, but who retain sharp minds and steady hands, become primary firekeepers, teaching younger adults the subtle skills required for reliable maintenance. They show you how to identify good fuel by weight and smell, how to position logs for optimal burning, how to read smoke color and adjust ventilation accordingly. This knowledge transfer happens through demonstration rather than lecture. You watch them work for months or years, gradually absorbing techniques through observation and imitation until you can maintain fire independently. You check your wood supply, counting the remaining branches and estimating whether they'll last until dawn. The calculation is automatic, performed through mental arithmetic that's never been formalized, but that you've practiced thousands of times. 10 large branches remaining, each should burn for roughly an hour if fed gradually. Dawn is approximately 6 hours away, which means you have surplus assuming no unexpected weather changes or increased predator activity that requires building the fire larger. The math works, and you relax slightly, knowing you won't need to wake someone to gather emergency fuel during darkness. A task that's extremely dangerous and avoided except in desperate circumstances. The fire's smoke serves defensive purposes beyond the flames themselves. The smoke carries human scent upward and outward, broadcasting your presence across a much wider area than scent barriers can achieve. But it also irritates predators' eyes and respiratory systems, making the immediate vicinity of your fire actively unpleasant for animals that depend on scent tracking and clear vision for hunting. A leopard that approaches your fire doesn't just see frightening flames. It also experiences stinging eyes, difficulty breathing, and overwhelming smoke smell that masks the scent of potential prey. These layered discomforts add up to a conclusion that hunting elsewhere is preferable, and the leopard departs without ever testing your defenses directly. Let me add more content to reach the target range. You've noticed that fire behavior changes throughout the night, becoming harder to maintain during the coldest hours just before dawn, when temperature differentials are maximal and wood seems to burn less efficiently. You compensate by stockpiling extra fuel for those difficult hours, front-loading the work during earlier shifts when you have more energy. This temporal planning represents sophisticated understanding of circadian patterns and thermal dynamics, even if you couldn't explain the science underlying your strategies. You just know that dawn fires are tricky, and you prepare accordingly through experience-driven pragmatism. You notice movement at the edge of firelight and tense instinctively before recognizing the shapes. A small pack of wild dogs has appeared, perhaps 6 or 7 individuals, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly interested in your camp's activities. These aren't the domesticated dogs that humans will eventually breed. They're fully wild canids, lean and rangy with mottled coats and intelligent eyes that reflect the firelight in eerie golden flashes. Your initial fear subsides because experience has taught you that wild dogs, unlike most predators, aren't particularly interested in hunting humans. More importantly, they hate lions with passionate intensity, and their presence near your camp actually increases your safety rather than threatening it. The relationship between early humans and wild canids is complicated in ways that won't be fully understood until thousands of years later, when anthropologists study the co-evolution of species. You don't think of these dogs as allies exactly. They're not friendly, not tame, not reliable in any domestic sense. But there's a mutual understanding, an unspoken arrangement where both species benefit from proximity without formal cooperation. The dogs tolerate your presence because your fires and noise deter larger predators that might otherwise hunt them. You tolerate the dog's presence because they serve as additional sentries, their superior hearing and smell detecting threats before your human senses register danger. It's not quite symbiosis, not yet, but it's the beginning of something that will eventually transform both species forever. The wild dogs are currently investigating something beyond your visual range, their attention focused on darkness to the north. You watch their body language carefully, reading information from posture and movement that's as clear as spoken words would be. Their ears are pricked forward but not flattened in fear. Their tails are neutral rather than tucked or bristled. Their vocalizations are soft chuffing sounds rather than alarm barks. This combination tells you they've detected something interesting but not immediately threatening. Probably a herd of prey animals moving through the area, possibly even the same gazelles you heard earlier. The dogs are deciding whether the herd is worth pursuing or whether they should wait for better opportunity. One of the dogs suddenly barks sharply, a sound completely different from the previous soft chuffing, and the entire pack goes rigid. Their attention has shifted westward, toward the direction where you heard lions feeding hours ago. Every dog is staring in that direction now, hackles raised, bodies tense with hostility that borders on rage. This tells you the lions have finished feeding and are moving again, possibly in your general direction, and the dogs have detected their approach through scent or sound that your human senses haven't yet registered. It's an early warning system, a biological alarm that gives you precious minutes to prepare rather than seconds to react. You quietly alert your fellow watchers, using hand signals that communicate predator approaching from west, without making noise that might telegraph your awareness to whatever's coming. Everyone shifts position slightly, gripping weapons more firmly, adding fuel to the fire to strengthen its deterrent glow. The sleeping band members haven't been woken yet. There's no point in creating panic before you confirm the threat's nature and trajectory. But everyone who's awake is now focused, ready, watching the western approach while also monitoring the dog's behavior for additional information about what's developing beyond human sensory range. The dogs begin retreating, backing away from the direction of their attention, while maintaining a visual contact with whatever they've detected. This is significant because it means the threat is substantial enough that even a pack of 7 wild dogs working together and capable of bringing down prey much larger than themselves have decided discretion is preferable to confrontation. That almost certainly means multiple lions, probably the same pride you heard earlier, now moving through their territory on post-feeding patrol. The dogs will yield ground to lions because direct conflict would be suicidal despite their numerical advantage. Lions are simply too large, too powerful, too willing to kill competitors even when not hungry. Historians still argue whether early humans actively cooperated with wild canids, or whether they simply existed in proximity and learned to read each other's signals without coordination. The archaeological evidence is frustratingly vague. Canid bones appear at human habitation sites, but whether those bones represent hunted prey, tolerated neighbours, or proto-domestic partners remains unclear. What's certain is that the relationship existed, that humans and wild dogs occupied overlapping ecological niches and developed behavioural patterns that accommodated each other's presence. You're living that relationship right now, extracting survival-critical information from the dog's alarm responses without any formal agreement or mutual training. The dogs have fully retreated now, disappearing into darkness beyond your fire's reach, and silence settles over the landscape with ominous weight. This is the pre-confrontation quiet, the moment when every creature capable of movement has either fled or frozen, waiting to see what the apex predators will do. Your heart is pounding hard enough that you can feel it in your throat, adrenaline flooding your system in preparation for potential conflict. Your hands are slick with sweat, despite the cool night air, and you consciously adjust your grip on the spear to prevent it slipping if you need to thrust suddenly. Then you see them, 3 lions, massive shapes moving with liquid grace across open ground about 70 feet from your position. Even in darkness, you can distinguish their forms against the slightly lighter sky, can see the distinctive silhouettes that mean adult pride members rather than juvenile or elderly individuals. They're not charging, not hunting actively, just patrolling their territory with that casual confidence that apex predators display when they know nothing can challenge them. One of them, probably a male based on size, pauses to stare directly at your fire, and for a long moment you make eye contact across the distance. His eyes reflect the firelight as twin orange dots that seem to bore into your soul, evaluating, calculating, deciding. The moment stretches until time feels elastic, until you're convinced the lion is about to charge and you're mentally rehearsing your defensive response. Where to position the spear, how to angle your body, which direction to retreat if the defense fails. But then the lion simply turns away, dismissing your entire band as unworthy of attention, and continues his patrol with the other pride members following. They cross your visual field with maddening slowness, taking their time because they own the night and every creature in it, and eventually disappear into darkness on the eastern side of your perimeter. The encounter is over, resolved without violence through nothing more than the lion's indifference and your defensive preparations that made attacking you seem like more effort than the potential payoff justified. You exhale shakily, realizing you've been holding your breath for most of the encounter. Your fellow watchers are equally tense, gradually relaxing as minutes pass without the lions returning. After perhaps 15 minutes, the wild dogs reappear at the edge of firelight, having apparently tracked the lion's departure and determined the coast is clear enough to resume their own activities. Their presence is reassuring. If the dogs feel safe enough to return, then the immediate threat has likely passed. You make a mental note of their behavior, adding tonight's observations to your accumulated knowledge about how different species interact and what their behavioral patterns reveal about environmental dangers. The relationship with wild dogs isn't always peaceful. Sometimes your band competes directly with dog packs for scavenging opportunities, driving them away from kills that both species want to exploit. Sometimes dogs become bold enough to steal food from the band's storage areas, requiring aggressive defense and occasional violence to discourage theft. But these conflicts are manageable, resolved through posturing and limited aggression rather than fights to the death. The dogs aren't trying to eat you, and you're not trying to eat them, which creates room for coexistence that doesn't exist with true predators who view you as food. There are also the jackals, smaller canids that occasionally appear near human camps, filling a similar ecological role as wild dogs, but with less threatening presence and less useful vigilance. The jackals are more scavengers than hunters, less willing to confront danger, more likely to flee at first disturbance. They provide some early warning value, but nothing compared to the wild dog's attentiveness and bravery. Still, you tolerate jackal presence because they're cleaning up organic waste around camp, food scraps, bone fragments, feces that would otherwise attract insects and create sanitation problems that your band doesn't have resources to address through more sophisticated means. You remember with uncomfortable clarity the night 2 rainy seasons ago when everything went wrong, when the accumulated wisdom of generations proved insufficient against bad luck and worse judgment. It started with the band choosing a new campsite without properly investigating its history, settling into a cave that seemed perfect. Good acoustics, elevated position, nearby water source. Everything checked the boxes on your mental list of ideal sleeping locations. But what you didn't know, couldn't have known without spending more time observing, was that the cave had a fatal flaw. During heavy rains, a seasonal stream that ran dry most of the year would suddenly flood, channeling water directly into the cave's interior and turning safe shelter into a drowning trap. The rains came unexpectedly that night, transforming from light drizzle to torrential downpour within minutes. The fire sputtered and died despite desperate attempts to shelter it, plunging the band into absolute darkness punctuated only by lightning flashes. Then the water arrived, first as a trickle that seemed manageable, then as a rushing torrent that knocked people off their feet and swept away belongings. In the chaos and darkness, the band scattered, some fleeing deeper into the cave where the water was shallower, others running outside into the storm where at least visibility existed during lightning strikes. You remember the screaming, the confusion, the absolute terror of being surrounded by invisible danger in multiple forms simultaneously: drowning, predators, separation from the group, hypothermia from cold water. When dawn finally arrived and the survivors regrouped, you counted the losses: 2 children missing, presumed drowned or taken by predators during the chaos. 1 elderly man swept away by the current, his body found later wedged between rocks a quarter-mile downstream. Most of the band's tools and food stores lost to the flood. The fire extinguished, requiring half a day of desperate work to regenerate from embers someone had miraculously preserved in a protected hollow. It was catastrophe, the kind of disaster that could end a band's existence, and it taught lessons that became seared into collective memory with the intensity of trauma. The primary lesson was obvious. Test new campsites thoroughly before committing to them, especially regarding water flow patterns. After that disaster, your band developed a systematic site evaluation process. Before settling anywhere, you observed the terrain during wet weather if possible, looking for signs of water channels, stained rocks, eroded soil, vegetation patterns that indicate seasonal flooding. You dig test holes to assess drainage. You ask neighbouring bands whether they know the area's history. It's due diligence purchased through blood, caution born from preventable tragedy that you're determined never to repeat. But flooding wasn't the only way campsites could fail catastrophically. You've heard stories from other bands about caves that collapsed during earthquakes, burying sleeping families under tons of rock, about trees chosen for elevated sleeping that broke under collective weight, dropping people into darkness where predators waited, about cliff-top positions that seemed defensible until strong winds literally blew sleeping people over the edge. Every environment contains hidden dangers, traps that aren't obvious until they spring and kill someone, and learning to identify these hazards before they manifest requires constant vigilance and willingness to learn from others' mistakes. There was also the time your band discovered that certain caves, despite seeming perfect, were actually hunting grounds for leopards who'd learned that humans returning to the same site repeatedly became predictable and therefore vulnerable. The leopard would position itself on a ledge above the cave entrance and drop onto passing humans with devastating effectiveness. 3 bands lost members to this particular leopard before someone organised a coordinated hunt and killed it, eliminating a predator who'd specialised in human prey and teaching everyone a harsh lesson about the dangers of predictable routines and failure to vary sleeping locations. Historians still argue whether early humans learned primarily from direct experience or from observational learning and information sharing between groups. The evidence suggests both pathways were crucial. You learn most powerfully from personal disaster, but you also learn from others' disasters if you're smart enough to listen when they share their stories. Your band's survival depends partly on your own accumulated experience, but equally on your willingness to accept wisdom from other groups, to believe their warnings even when you haven't personally experienced the specific dangers they're describing. It's the beginning of cultural knowledge transmission, information that exists beyond individual memory and gets passed between communities through storytelling and demonstration. The failed sleep methods extend beyond site selection to include ill-conceived defensive strategies. You've heard about bands that tried sleeping in trees too close together, creating bridges that leopards could use to move between platforms and attack multiple sleeping groups in rapid succession. About bands that built thorough barriers around their camps, thinking they were creating fortresses, only to discover they'd trapped themselves when fire accidentally ignited the barriers and created infernos that killed everyone inside. About bands that posted only one watcher instead of multiple, allowing that single person to fall asleep and leaving everyone vulnerable to attack that killed half the group before anyone could mount defense. Each failed method carries a story, usually a tragedy, always a lesson that gets encoded into your band's behavioral repertoire through negative reinforcement. You don't sleep in tightly clustered trees anymore. You don't build complete barriers that prevent escape. You don't trust single watchers. These rules seem obvious in retrospect, but someone had to learn them the hard way, had to suffer the consequences of ignorance or overconfidence, and their suffering purchased knowledge that keeps you alive tonight. You're standing on a foundation of accumulated failures, each one a death that taught survivors what not to do. There's something almost scientific about this process of elimination. This experimental approach to survival, where different bands try different strategies, and the unsuccessful approaches get removed from the cultural pool through extinction of their practitioners. You're not conducting controlled experiments with careful measurement and peer review. You're just trying various survival tactics and observing which ones result in everybody dying versus which ones result in at least some people surviving to reproduce and pass on their methods. It's natural selection operating on behaviors rather than genes, cultural evolution running parallel to biological evolution and interacting with it in complex ways that won't be understood for hundreds of thousands of years. The failed methods also include some that weren't exactly failures but proved impractical despite initially seeming clever, like the band that tried sleeping in shifts with half the group awake and active all night, thinking they'd maximize defense while also getting productive work done. The approach worked for about a week before exhaustion accumulated to levels where people started making fatal mistakes during both day and night activities, proving that sleep fragmentation has limits and you can't just eliminate rest entirely even when facing constant danger. Or the band that tried sleeping completely buried under piles of brush and grass, thinking they'd be invisible to predators. They were invisible, but they were also nearly invisible to each other during emergencies, and coordination failures during an attack resulted in casualties that proved the method's net benefit was negative. You shift position on your watching rock, your body aching from hours of maintained alertness, and you think about the bands that didn't make it, the groups whose last members died without passing on their knowledge or genes. They're invisible to history, leaving no trace except perhaps scattered bones and abandoned tools that future archaeologists will catalogue without understanding the human stories they represent. Every failed survival method has a last practitioner, someone who died not knowing they were the end of a lineage, the final expression of an approach that evolution was eliminating from the human behavioral repertoire. You're alive because your ancestors avoided being those final practitioners, because they learned and adapted and survived just barely long enough to reproduce and teach you what they knew. Let me add more to reach the target range. The tragedy 2 rainy seasons ago also taught your band about emotional recovery and collective trauma. For months afterward, people startled at rain sounds, experienced nightmares about drowning, refused to sleep deeply even when conditions were safe. The psychological damage was as real as the physical losses, and healing required time and patience and collective support that your limited language couldn't quite articulate, but that everyone understood instinctively. You held each other more during sleep, maintained closer physical contact, needed reassurance that the catastrophe wasn't recurring. It was primitive therapy, Stone Age psychological care, and it worked well enough that the band eventually regained its equilibrium and continued surviving. You feel your eyelids growing heavy despite your best efforts to maintain alertness, and you recognize this sensation with intimate familiarity. It's the deep exhaustion that comes from weeks, months, years of never sleeping deeply, never resting completely, never truly feeling safe enough to surrender consciousness fully. Your brain is operating in a constant state of partial arousal, a neurological configuration that won't be studied scientifically until hundreds of thousands of years in the future, but that you experience every single night of your existence. Sleep researchers will eventually call this hypervigilance and recognize it as both an adaptive response to environmental threat and a source of chronic stress that degrades health and cognitive function over time. Your sleep architecture has been shaped by evolutionary pressures that prioritize survival over restoration, keeping you alive at the cost of never feeling truly rested. The deep sleep stages that modern humans enjoy in their locked bedrooms, those periods of profound unconsciousness where the brain processes memories and repairs cellular damage, are luxuries you can barely afford. You spend most of your sleeping hours in lighter stages, hovering near consciousness, ready to wake instantly when sounds or smells signal potential danger. This fragmented sleep pattern is exhausting, leaves you operating at reduced cognitive capacity, probably shaves years off your potential lifespan through accumulated stress damage. But it keeps you alive long enough to reproduce, which is the only metric natural selection cares about. The polyphasic sleep pattern your band practices, sleeping in multiple short sessions rather than one long consolidated block, is another adaptation to predator pressure that future sleep scientists will study with fascination. You sleep perhaps 3 or 4 separate times during the night, each session lasting 30 to 90 minutes, separated by periods of full wakefulness. This pattern serves multiple functions. It allows watch rotation without requiring anyone to stay awake for impossibly long shifts. It reduces the vulnerability window that deep sleep creates, and it aligns with natural human sleep rhythms that won't be fully suppressed until artificial lighting and industrial work schedules force consolidated sleep patterns thousands of years from now. Your brain has developed hair-trigger arousal systems that respond to specific stimuli even during sleep. Certain sounds, a breaking branch, specific vocalization, changes in fire crackling, can wake you from even relatively deep sleep within milliseconds, bypassing the normal neural pathways that require conscious processing. It's like your auditory cortex as a dedicated fast-track circuit for threats, one that connects directly to arousal systems without needing to route through higher cognitive functions. This rapid response has saved your life multiple times, waking you with enough warning to grab your spear and assume defensive position before the threat fully materialized. It's also why sudden noises make your heart race and your hands shake. Your nervous system is calibrated for threat response, not for calm evaluation. Historians still argue whether these sleep adaptations are primarily genetic or primarily learned, whether you're born with hypervigilant nervous systems or whether constant environmental stress trained your brain into these patterns. The truth is almost certainly both. You inherit baseline tendencies toward light sleep and easy arousal from ancestors who survived because they possessed those traits, but you also develop and refine these responses through lived experience that reinforces their necessity. Your genes load the gun, but your environment pulls the trigger, and the resulting sleep architecture represents the interaction between inherited predisposition and acquired adaptation. The chronic sleep deprivation has cognitive consequences that affect every aspect of your life. Your memory isn't as sharp as it could be. You forget details, struggle to learn complex skills, have difficulty planning beyond immediate timeframes. Your emotional regulation is impaired, making you irritable and prone to overreaction during stressful situations. Your physical coordination suffers, increasing injury risk during hunting and foraging activities. These deficits are the price you pay for vigilance, the trade-offs that evolution has deemed acceptable because the alternative, sleeping deeply and getting eaten, is obviously worse. You're operating below your theoretical cognitive potential, but you're operating, which means the system is working adequately if not optimally. There are also the dreams, vivid and often terrifying, that populate your fragmented sleep periods. You dream of being chased by predators, of falling from heights, of being separated from the band and lost in darkness. These nightmares probably serve functions related to threat simulation and response rehearsal, giving your brain opportunities to practice survival scenarios in the safe environment of sleep. When you dream of a lion attacking and wake up with your heart pounding, you've just completed a training session that reinforces escape responses without requiring actual life-threatening encounters. The dreams are unpleasant, sometimes traumatic enough to disrupt sleep further, but they're also preparation for reality, mental rehearsal that might save your life when crisis arrives. Your band members show the same sleep patterns, the same chronic exhaustion, the same hair-trigger arousal responses. It's universal within your community because environmental pressures affect everyone equally. The only exceptions are the very young children who still sleep more deeply because their developing brains require more intensive restoration and who depend entirely on adults to protect them during their vulnerable unconsciousness. As children age and begin participating in watch duties and defensive activities, their sleep patterns gradually shift toward the fragmented, hypervigilant architecture that characterizes adult sleep in your world. It's a rite of passage, this transition from deep child sleep to shallow adult sleep, marking the movement from protected innocence to responsible vigilance. The sleep deprivation also affects your perception and judgment in ways that are sometimes dangerous. After several consecutive nights of poor sleep, you start experiencing microsleeps, brief periods of a few seconds where you essentially lose consciousness while apparently remaining awake. Your eyes might be open, your posture maintained, but your brain has briefly shut down to grab emergency restoration. These microsleeps during watch shifts are terrifying because you might miss critical threats during those few seconds of unexpected unconsciousness. Your band has developed countermeasures, watchers standing rather than sitting, engaging in low-level physical activity like whittling or rope making to maintain arousal, using the buddy system where multiple watchers monitor each other for signs of microsleep episodes. You've also noticed that sleep needs vary between individuals, creating natural role differentiation within the band. Some people seem to function adequately on minimal sleep, remaining alert and effective even after nights of fragmented rest. Others require more sleep to maintain basic competence, becoming dangerously impaired when rest is insufficient. The natural night owls in your band, those whose circadian rhythms make them alert during late hours, gravitate toward later watch shifts. The morning people whose brains wake easily as dawn approaches naturally take the final pre-dawn watches. This informal specialization based on individual chronotypes creates efficiency gains that wouldn't be possible if everyone tried to maintain identical schedules regardless of personal physiology. The long-term health consequences of chronic sleep deprivation won't be understood for hundreds of thousands of years, but you're experiencing them nonetheless. Your immune system is probably compromised, making you more vulnerable to infections and parasites. Your cardiovascular system is under constant stress from repeated adrenaline spikes and elevated cortisol. Your metabolism is likely disrupted, affecting how your body processes food and stores energy. These effects accumulate over decades, probably contributing to earlier aging and death than would occur under more restful conditions. But evolution doesn't care about your longevity past reproductive age. If you survive long enough to have children and see them through their vulnerable early years, natural selection considers you a success even if you're exhausted and prematurely aged. Let me add more content to reach the target range. There's also the phenomenon you've noticed but can't fully explain, that different people seem to dream about different things, suggesting individual variation in how brains process threat and prepare responses. Some band members dream primarily about predators, others about environmental hazards like falling or drowning, others about social threats like being abandoned by the group. These dream themes probably reflect individual fear profiles and personal history with specific dangers. Your own dreams focus heavily on predation scenarios, probably because you've had several close encounters with lions and leopards that left psychological imprints deeper than physical scars. The dreams replay and remix these encounters, creating variations that prepare you for future possibilities, while also traumatizing you with repeated exposure to your worst fears. The sky is beginning to change, almost imperceptibly at first, the absolute blackness softening into something that's not quite light, but isn't total darkness either. You've been watching for this transition with desperate anticipation for the past hour, and now that it's arriving, you feel a wave of relief so intense it's almost physical, a loosening of tension that's been coiled in your muscles and nerves throughout the entire night. Dawn is coming, which means you've survived another night, another 12 hours of vulnerability and threat and constant vigilance. The lions will retreat to shade for their daytime rest. The leopards will climb into trees and become invisible. The hyenas will slink back to their dens. The predator's world is ending, and the human's world is beginning again. At least for the next 12 hours. You wake the next watch rotation, though they are hardly needed now with daylight approaching. The gesture is more ritual than practical necessity, a way of maintaining routine and ensuring everyone participates in the shared relief of survival. People begin stirring throughout the sleeping circle, bodies uncurling from defensive positions, stretching muscles that have been cramped all night, blinking away sleep that was never deep enough to feel truly restorative. Children wake with their usual chaotic energy, apparently unaware of how close danger has prowled during their unconscious hours. The elderly wake more slowly, joints stiff from cold ground and insufficient rest, faces showing the cumulative exhaustion of thousands of nights just like this one. The fire has burned down to coals during the final watch, and someone begins building it back up. Not for defense now, but for warmth and cooking, and the simple comfort of flames that have become synonymous with human existence. The smoke rises straight upward in the still morning air, a signal to anyone watching that your band has survived the night and is preparing for the day's activities. Other bands within visual range will see your smoke and know you're still alive, will feel reassured by your presence in the shared landscape of survival. It's communication without words, community without direct contact, the beginning of human social networks that will eventually span the globe. People begin the morning routines that prepare the band for the day's activities, checking weapons for damage that might have occurred overnight, assessing food stores to determine foraging priorities, discussing in simple language and gesture where today's efforts should focus. Should you remain near this campsite and exploit local resources, or travel to new areas in search of better opportunities? Should you dedicate time to tool making and maintenance or prioritize immediate food acquisition? These decisions feel mundane, ordinary, but they represent sophisticated resource management and strategic planning that requires cognitive capabilities far beyond what any other species can achieve. You're not just surviving. You're thinking, planning, optimizing, making calculated choices about how to allocate limited time and energy across competing priorities. The sunrise itself, when it finally arrives, is spectacular. Oranges and reds and purples painting the eastern sky in colors that take your breath away, even after witnessing the phenomenon thousands of times. There's something about surviving until dawn that makes the sunrise feel earned, like a reward for not getting killed during the night, a cosmic acknowledgement that you've passed another test in the endless examination that is existence. You don't have language sophisticated enough to articulate beauty or express gratitude to the universe, but you feel something profound nonetheless, some recognition that this moment, alive, warm, safe enough for now is precious beyond measure. The band begins its dawn ritual, an informal ceremony that has emerged organically over generations without anyone formally designing or mandating it. Everyone gathers near the fire, close enough to feel its warmth but not so close that smoke becomes overwhelming. Someone, usually the eldest or most respected member present, makes a sound. Not quite a word, more like a vocalization that carries emotional weight and shared meaning. Others respond with similar sounds, creating a brief chorus that bonds the group through synchronized expression. It's not religious exactly, since your conception of divine beings is still rudimentary and confused, but it's spiritual in the sense that it acknowledges something larger than individual survival, some recognition that you've succeeded collectively through cooperation and shared sacrifice. Children are counted, visually inspected to ensure everyone who fell asleep also woke up. This counting is critical because night sometimes claims victims through illness, accident, or predation that goes unnoticed in darkness. When the count comes up complete, when everyone accounted for yesterday is still present today, there's visible relief and quiet satisfaction. You've beaten the odds again. The lions roamed nearby, but everyone survived. Another night in the eternal struggle has ended in victory, however temporary and qualified that victory might be. Historians still argue whether early humans possessed the cognitive capacity for gratitude, or whether such emotions emerged later in human evolution, but regardless of terminology, you're feeling something that contemporary humans would recognize as thankfulness, relief and appreciation for continued existence that might easily have been extinguished during the darkness. The fire gets built higher now, flames climbing cheerfully in morning light, and someone places stones near the coals to heat for cooking. Others begin preparing food, tubers that need roasting, meat strips that require warming, insects that become more palatable when briefly exposed to heat. The smells of cooking food blend with smoke and morning air, creating an olfactory signature that means safety, community, survival. Your stomach growls in anticipation even though you're too tired to feel genuinely hungry. Your body knows food is coming and responds with automatic preparation, digestive systems activating in readiness for the fuel that will power today's activities. You look around at your band members in growing daylight, seeing their faces clearly now instead of as shadows and shapes. There's your mother, looking older than her years, probably not yet 40, but moving like someone much more elderly, ground down by decades of stress and insufficient rest. There's your cousin who learned a freeze response, now chatting animatedly with other children, yesterday's fear completely forgotten in the resilience of youth. There's the uncle who taught you so much, currently inspecting his spear and frowning at a crack that will require repairs. There's the one-armed elder who nevertheless contributes through wisdom and fire tending, his missing limb a permanent reminder that survival comes with costs and that living long enough to become elderly is itself an achievement worth celebrating. These people are your world, your security, your identity. Without them, you'd be nothing, just isolated prey waiting to be consumed by the next predator that noticed you. With them, you're part of something resilient and capable, a collective that has survived for generations and will hopefully survive for generations more. The bonds between you aren't based on affection alone. They're forged through shared danger, mutual dependence, the recognition that every person contributes to everyone else's survival, and that betrayal or abandonment means death for both betrayer and betrayed. It's community at its most fundamental, stripped of all pretense and luxury, reduced to the essential core of humans keeping each other alive through cooperation. The morning continues brightening, the sun now visible above the horizon, its warmth beginning to reach your skin and drive away the night's accumulated chill. You can hear birds calling, insects buzzing, the normal sounds of daytime savanna that are so different from the menacing symphony of darkness. The world transforms in daylight, becomes less threatening, more comprehensible, more manageable. The same landscape that seemed infinite and hostile during night now appears finite and navigable, full of resources and opportunities rather than just dangers and death. It's the same physical space, but human perception shifts so dramatically with lighting conditions that it might as well be a different planet. You're so tired you can barely stand, your legs trembling slightly from exhaustion and accumulated tension. But you don't lie down to sleep yet. There's too much to do, too many preparations for tonight's survival that must happen during safe daylight hours. The wood supply needs replenishing, the scent barrier needs inspection and repair, weapons require maintenance, food must be gathered. The luxury of immediate rest after surviving the night doesn't exist because survival is a 24-hour occupation, not something you can turn off during daylight and resume at sunset. You'll sleep later, probably during the hot afternoon hours when predators also rest and when the band can afford to have some members temporarily unconscious. Do you remember when this journey started? Back in the darkness with the fire being built and the fear settling into your bones like familiar cold? You've travelled through an entire night in the span of this story, experienced the full cycle of human vulnerability and resilience that has repeated itself millions of times across hundreds of thousands of years. Every night your ancestors faced these same challenges, the predators circling, the fire demanding fuel, the exhaustion warring with necessity, the dawn arriving as both relief and beginning of new labour. You're connected to them through this shared experience, through the universal human struggle to stay alive in a world designed to consume you. The story may have solved mysteries you never consciously considered. Why do you still wake at 3 a.m. for no apparent reason? It's your ancestral watch rotation, your DNA remembering shifts that once meant life or death. Why are children afraid of the dark despite living in safe modern homes? They're responding to legitimate dangers that existed for 99% of human history, fears that were adaptive and appropriate until very recently in evolutionary time. Why do campfires feel so comforting, so psychologically essential? Their safety made visible, security you can touch and smell and hear crackling, the original human technology that separated us from every other species on Earth. The dawn is fully arrived now, the sun climbing higher, heat beginning to build toward the afternoon intensity that will drive everyone into shade and rest. The night is over, truly over, and you've survived it along with your band and your ancestors and the endless human chain of survival that stretches back to the first fire and forward to futures you can't imagine. You're standing at the beginning of another day, exhausted and alive, ready to face whatever comes next because you have no choice and because choice itself is a luxury. You're human, and being human means surviving one more night, then another, until eventually you don't anymore, but your children do, and their children do, and the chain continues forward into time without end. You survived the night while lions roamed nearby, and that's everything and nothing simultaneously. Tomorrow night the lions will roam again, and you'll face the same challenges with the same limited tools and the same desperate determination. But for now, for this precious morning moment, you can rest in the knowledge that you won. You beat the darkness. You're still here. Let the morning warmth settle into your bones now. Let the relief of survival wash over you like gentle rain on sun-baked earth. The fire crackles softly beside you, no longer a desperate necessity but comfortable companion, and the smoke rises lazily into air that smells of safety and possibility instead of threat and fear. Your eyelids are so heavy now, impossibly heavy, and finally you can let them close because the sun is up and the predators have retreated and someone else is watching while you surrender to the sleep you've earned through survival. The sounds around you fade into distant background music, voices of your band members talking softly, the crackling fire, birds calling from nearby trees, all of it blending into a lullaby that's older than language and more fundamental than thought. You're safe enough for now, protected by daylight and community and all the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations who faced the same fears and survived them just barely enough to pass their knowledge forward to you. Let that knowledge hold you now. Let it cradle you into rest that's deeper than the fragmented sleep of darkness. Let yourself drift into dreams that are warm instead of terrifying. The lions are sleeping too, somewhere in the shade, full and satisfied and temporarily harmless. The leopards are drowsing in their trees. The hyenas are denned up with their young. Even the predators rest during daylight hours, and if they can rest, then certainly you can too. Certainly you've earned this brief escape from vigilance into the soft embrace of unconsciousness that repairs and restores and prepares you for tonight's survival and tomorrow's and all the nights that follow. Sleep now, dear survivor. Sleep deeply and dream softly, for you've travelled through darkness and emerged into light, and that journey deserves its reward of peaceful rest.